Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Refused to Attend UA? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. The night after Yagi Toshinori offered his power to Midoriya Izuku, he dreamt of All for One. It was a dream of the battle he had fought and won. Of All for One, standing over him, laughing like he had won while Toshinori's entrails were spread across the ground. Toshinori remembered, too, the way that he had defeated him, by sweeping his legs out and then repeatedly bashing his head into the ground. Needless to say, Toshinori awoke from the dream in a cold sweat. He found his body unwilling to respond to his commands, gripped in the vice of fear, like All for One was in this room with him. It wasn't possible, it shouldn't be possible, All for One was gone, but All for One had defied death countless times before. It was entirely possible that it had happened again. Toshinori ran hands through his hair. He had been a hero for far too long to risk ignoring his instincts. And he had a duty to protect others, to keep people safe. He had a successor now, and that meant his successor had to come first. He checked the time. It was early, much earlier than their scheduled meeting time, but this would give Toshinori some time to think about what he wanted to say. All Might was already on the beach when Izuku arrived, which was a little surprising, because Izuku was a whole hour ahead of schedule. He was already running, but he somehow ran even faster when he caught sight of his hero, a cheerful greeting already working its way onto his lips. He stopped, however, when he saw All Might's face. In this form, he was already gaunt, but right now he looked exhausted, world-weary, ready to keel over and sleep for the next 2 days. All Might? Izuku prompted gently, and All Might turned, sunken blue eyes falling on him. All Might offered him a smile, but it was a shadow of the brilliant smiles he usually wore, in either form. "Ah, young Midoriya," he said. "You're quite early, my boy." Izuku shuffled awkwardly. "Ah, I'm sorry, All Might. I probably shouldn't have." "There's no need to apologize," All Might said, gently interrupting his rant. "There's never a need to apologize for being enthusiastic about something, my boy." "Oh," Izuku said, rather eloquently. This elicited a small chuckle from All Might, but it didn't last long before he sobered again, casting his eyes back towards the horizon. "I've always loved dawn," he said, voice low and gentle in a way that was unique to this form. "It is appealing," Izuku said, cautiously, as if All Might was going to spook if he said it too loud or too fast. Which was a little ridiculous, probably, but All Might was also acting kind of strange, so Izuku couldn't be too sure. Besides, if Kaken was in a gloomy mood, he was prone to snapping, and since Izuku didn't have much more of a model for people in bad moods to go off of than that one, Izuku had learned to always tread with care around sour expressions. "It's a seagull," All Might said. "A new dawn, a new day, a fresh start." In these moments, right as the sun is first peeking over the horizon, the day is malleable. It could become anything you wanted it to be. "It's a bit like you in that way, my boy." Izuku had been buckling down for a life lesson from All Might. He wondered if he was ever going to get used to that, so he startled when All Might finished his statement. "Me?" he squeaked out, feeling a warmth on his face that almost certainly meant he was blushing. Curse his overly expressive face. All Might smiled fondly at him. "Yes, you. If you still accept my quirk after this, that is." All Might, why wouldn't I? I've wanted a quirk my whole life, and to get yours? I promise you, All Might, I mean, I don't know how I deserve this amazingly incredible chance in the first place, but I know I want your quirk. I mean, if you want to give me your quirk still." He slapped a hand over his mouth, effectively silencing himself. What a silly thing to say. All Might had sounded so serious when he offered it yesterday. But, oh no, what if it was a joke? What if it was all an elaborate prank? What if he thought about it and realized that Izuku was just as useless and unworthy as everyone else thought, and now? "I don't think you're useless, young Midoriya." A hand descended onto his shoulder and squeezed, eliciting a squeak from Izuku. He must have been saying his thoughts out loud again. He really needed to get a handle on that. And there's nobody I would rather pass one for all onto than you, but All Might trailed off, taking in a deep breath. I haven't been completely honest with you, my boy. Oi, Izuku said, biting down on his lip in an attempt to control the stammering. Is there something else about one for all that I need to know, All Might? There are lots of things you should know, he said with a sigh, his hand still heavy on Izuku's shoulder. And after you hear them, well, if you decide that you no longer want this power, then I want you to know that I will not be the slightest bit upset with you if you turn it down. There was a pretty fat chance of that happening, but Izuku didn't say that. This was a serious moment, and whatever it was clearly bothering All Might. He needed to go into this with a serious mindset. All Might took a deep breath and told him. He told him a story of two brothers, one small and weak and the other strong. He spoke of a criminal overlord with the ability to both steal quirks and pass them along to others, of how he passed a quirk along to his own, supposedly quirkless brother. And then this quirk combined with the brother's original, unknown quirk, which allowed him to pass on his quirk, creating one for all. One for all passed from generation to generation, each wielder trying to stop All for One before eventually being killed by him. It had a bloody history when it was given to All Might, and All Might made it bloodier. He fought All for One and won, but he was severely wounded in the process, which was why now. There's more though, isn't there? Izuku asked quietly, because he hadn't spent his whole life being bullied to not know how to read in between the lines of what people said. You're worried? I don't think that he really died, All Might said. And if that's true, then it means one day he'll come for you too. And I'll probably lose that fight. No, young Midoriya. I will do everything in my power to ensure that you won't, I promise you that. I swear on my life. No, don't do that. Please. I don't want anyone to die for me, but especially not you, All Might. All Might was quiet, and Izuku inhaled sharply. Okay. All Might echoed. Okay, Izuku said, nodding. I don't want this to sound brash or like I don't care because I do. I mean, I definitely don't want to die, and I will do everything I can to ensure that I don't, but I've always wanted to be a hero, All Might. I've always admired heroes. It doesn't matter what quirk you have, or how strong you are, or how smart you are. If you want to be the hero, you always run the risk of dying when someone stronger than you comes along. And even if that happens to me, which I don't want it to, as long as I save one person in the process, that's okay. So, I want to be a hero, All Might, and this is part of being a hero, so okay. I still want your quirk as long as you want to give it to me. Even though I'm not impressive. To Izuku's surprise, he suddenly found himself engulfed in a hug. All Might was hugging him. Hugging him. This was unreal. He wanted to cry. Boy, he was crying. My boy, All Might said, voice thick. Maybe All Might was crying too. You are the most impressive young man I have ever met. And you already are a hero. You're my hero. Ah, Izuku said, very eloquently. They hugged for a long time after that. About a week after that, All Might asked Izuku if he was aiming for the hero course at UA. The question was so sudden that Izuku nearly dropped a microwave on his toes. The truth was, if All Might had asked him that a week ago, there would have only been one possible answer to that question. All Might had gone to UA was the best, so Izuku was going to go there too if he could. But things were a little different, now that he was going to receive All Might's quirk. No, he said, decisively. All Might looked caught off guard, which was a very rare expression on him. No, he echoed, like he couldn't believe it. A laugh bubbled out of Izuku's throat. He honestly couldn't believe it either. No, he repeated. Why? I always dreamed of going to UA, Izuku admitted as he deposited the microwave into the back of the trash truck All Might had ordered. For so many reasons. I mean, it was your alma mater, it's the best hero course in the country, it's close to where I live, but, no. I'm going to inherit your quirk, and I think I should be careful about it, at least at first. is an amazing school, but if I got in and I competed in the sports festivals and people saw me using your quirk, I think that people would have questions. I hadn't thought of that, All Might admitted sheepishly. There's another reason I shouldn't go, Izuku said, pausing before he grabbed more trash. Kaken, the kid that you saved from the sludge villain. Ah, yes, I remember him. Such fighting spirit. He's going to go far. Right, he is, Izuku said, nodding vigorously. Whatever else could be said about Kaken, that much he would never deny. Kaken was extremely talented, he was going to be a hero, and there was no getting around that. At UA. I don't see how that would be a problem, young Midoriya. If anything, having an ally at your school would be great. I'm quirkless, All Might, Izuku said, gesturing helplessly. Kaken knows that. If I suddenly develop a quirk, he'll be suspicious. Really suspicious. And if he tells other people, they might get suspicious too, and then people will be even more likely to connect the dots between us. I see, All Might said, blinking rapidly. Also, Izuku continued, because this was actually his biggest point, you said that you don't know for sure if All for One is dead or not. So I think it'll probably be best if I keep a little bit of a lower profile until we do know. That way, I can learn how to be a hero and help people without causing everyone and their grandmother to connect dots between the two of us. I know that it's a really powerful quirk, and I know that you probably want me to become a symbol like you, and I want to. I wanted to, but I just think that, right now, this is better. What do you think, All Might? All Might is quiet for a moment, and then he puffs up into his muscle form suddenly and unnecessarily, but it is really cool. I think that you surprise me every day, young Midoriya. You have already proven that you have the heart of a true hero, and now you are proving that you have the intelligence of one too. That's that then. You will not attend UA. He shrank again, with a cloud of smoke and a cough. Did you have anywhere else in mind? Izuku did because he had thought about this a great deal too. Shiketsu High, he said. Ah, an excellent choice, All Might agreed. Shiketsu is a prestigious school, just as prestigious as UA if not more so, but much more, subtle, so to speak. And their entrance exam takes place a month after UA's, which is good. If we stick to the schedule I outlined for you, that will give us an extra month, just for working with One for All. This is good, much better than my original plan. Izuku froze in the process of harnessing himself to a fridge. All Might. Yes, my boy? Does that mean you were planning to give me One for All right before UA's entrance exam? Like, the same day? Yes? Izuku felt himself paling. That's so scary, he whispered. Get a quirk, get All Might's super powerful quirk, and pass a practical exam that's legendary for how difficult it is, all in one day? That's scary. That's so scary. Well, it may have been an oversight in the initial planning, young Midoriya. Not to worry, though, since, that is no longer the plan. Okay, Izuku said. Yeah. That's a good thing. Yeah. He hauled off a fridge to the sound of All Might's awkward laughter. As it turned out, Izuku's misgivings about receiving One for All and taking an entrance exam were well-founded, seeing as he shattered his arm the first time he used it, spent a taxi ride to the nearest hospital in agony with All Might, of all people, fretting over him. He explained to the doctor that his quirk had manifested late, not necessarily untrue, and that he had broken his arm when he tried to use it, not necessarily untrue, and after a few healing quirks his arm was placed in a cast. He was told it would take a week to heal, still, but a week was a lot shorter than the usual 3 months, so he wasn't that upset about it. Afterwards he was rushed off to a quirk counselor, who dumped an armful of pamphlets on him before running several tests where he asked Izuku to turn his quirk on and off. The conclusion: his output power was stronger than what his body could safely handle. Which was essentially what All Might had said, when he told Izuku that he would have to train before he received One or All, lest his limbs explode. His arm didn't explode, per se, but it came close. The solution: reduce the power output to a level he could handle. And then he was ushered out of the office with a reminder that he needed to visit the quirk registry office as soon as humanly possible. I don't even know what output level I was at when I broke my arm, or how much I can actually handle, Izuku said to All Might as they walked out of the hospital. He glanced up and up at the hero, caught the guilty look on his face and added, I'm sorry you had to bring me here for this, All Might. I should have done better. My boy, you never need to be sorry for that, All Might said, clapping him on the shoulder. If anything, I should be sorry. I had no idea that the recoil would be so bad. I suffered no such consequences when I first used it, I'm afraid. Aha. Izuku started. Ah. Well, I think of my power output in percentages, All Might continued. I think to myself, if I want to jump from here to there, I'll need 70% of my power. Or if I only want to jump from here to there, I need 30%. Maybe if you start at the lowest percentage possible, like, say, 5%, you might be able to get a feel for how much you can handle that way. 5%, huh? Izuku scowled. That was so low. How was he supposed to be a hero if he was only able to use 5% of his strength? Izuku shook his head. He wasn't a hero, not yet. First, he needed to get into Shiketsu. And before that, he needed to face his mother. All Might left him outside of his apartment, with as many apologies as Izuku now had pamphlets, and Izuku made his way inside. Mom! He called softly as he opened the door. Izuku, honey? It's me. Izuku awkwardly slid off his shoes with his left arm. Mom. And at that moment she rounded the corner and saw the cast. She was a Midoriya, through and through, so her first reaction was to cry. Her second reaction was to demand an explanation for the broken arm. He gave her the same one as he gave the hospital. A quirk manifested late. When he tried to use it, he broke his arm. He wished he could tell her the truth, but he'd promised All Might, and himself, that he would keep the nature of his quirk under wraps. She cried, then too, but because he finally had a quirk he may or may not have joined her in this crying session. Then she asked him why he'd taken himself to the hospital, without even telling her about it, and he paused. I didn't want to worry you, he finally said. Oh, Izuku. Baby. Worry me? I'm already worried. And I need to know where you are from now on, you hear? Especially if you're at a hospital. Okay, Mom, he said, and she started tearing up. Hoping to get this in before the waterworks started again, he blurted, I want to go to Shiketsu. His mom blinked at him. Honey, I want to go to Shiketsu. He grit his teeth. Come on, Izuku, think of how to convince her. Now that I have a quirk, I want to be a hero. And if I can get it under control, then I want to go there and learn. But, honey, she trailed off, Shiketsu is so far. And you always wanted to go to UA, not Shiketsu. Why not try for there, Izuku? I know that it's competitive and difficult to get in, but surely you could do it. Izuku shook his head. The entrance exam for UA was today. Oh, she said. Izuku ran his left hand down his cast. I know it's a lot to ask, he said. I would have to move out, probably, but Shiketsu offers room and board for students living far away. And I could come visit on Sundays. And their entrance exam is in a month, so if I get in there, he trailed off, taking in his mother's face. She looked like she was going to say no. He didn't know what he would do if she did. It's my dream, he finished quietly. His mom closed her eyes and took a deep, shuddering breath. No more broken bones between now and then. Okay, he said, nodding vigorously. I promise. I'm going to get this quirk under control before then. She fiddled with her hands nervously. It was another habit that both Midoriyas shared. When she looked up at him, there was a determined set to her eyes. Once I said something to you that was not right, Izuku. He knew what she was talking about, and he started shaking his head, opening his mouth to protest, but she cut him off. It wasn't right, Izuku. You can't tell me otherwise. All you wanted to do was be a hero, and me, all I could do was say that I was sorry as I crushed your dreams too. No. I won't do it a second time, I promise you that, Izuku. I want you to be a hero. I know you'll be one. No, Mom, what I wanted you to say was, thank you, Izuku whispered, throat tight. They were both crying. That week, Izuku read all the pamphlets, watched every video of All Might fighting that had ever been uploaded to the internet, and thought about percentages. All Might was suspiciously busy through all of it, despite not being in the news much for hero work. Immediately after Izuku got the cast off, he met All Might at Dagoba Beach. It had been the hero that texted him, surprisingly, after a long bout of radio silence, so of course Izuku was going to go. Besides, he had something to show for his week of careful study, anyway. All Might, he shouted, the moment he saw him, breathless from running and excitement. All Might, good afternoon. All Might chuckled. Good afternoon, young Midoriya. You're quite spirited today. Spirited is one word for it. Izuku paused to catch his breath, hands on his knees, and then immediately launched into his explanation. So I love hero analysis more than anything, and even more than that I always loved analyzing you, but the thing is that I usually base my hero analyses off of their quirks, but for you, I never knew what your quirk was, so I had to speculate. So when I was looking back at the notes I took on you and how you use it, I realized that I was wrong. About nearly everything. So I spent the week rewatching every video of you fighting I was able to find, knowing how One for All works, and I came up with something. You use it constantly, don't you? Like, throughout your whole body, I mean? Because at first I was thinking that your quirk, our quirk, was something that was delegated either to our fists or our legs, depending on which one we were using at the moment, because that's how every other enhancement quirk works. However, this isn't any other enhancement quirk, so it makes sense that it wouldn't work like one, which was when I realized, whole body. I don't know what took me so long, honestly, since your muscle form is your entire body too. And your muscle form is definitely linked to One for All, so obviously, you must use One for All in your body. All Might was looking at him with a grin and a bright glint to his eyes. So, did you figure it out, my boy? I think I did, Izuku said, but now he paused because this part was strange. But, mine's a little different from yours. Different how? All Might asked. Let me just show you. Izuku took a deep breath, called on One for All inside him, and let it flood his entire body, only at 5% of its power. A moment later, there was a pop as the air around him dropped several temperatures, and then a crackle. He looked down at his body, and sure enough, just like every other time he'd practiced it, there was green lightning flickering around him. All Might had certainly never done that. Oh, All Might breathed, his smile growing somehow wider. You look like her. This observation shocked Izuku right out of his little mini-storm and into a squeak. What? All Might chuckled to himself. I'm sorry, I meant to say, you look like how my MS Tier looked when she used to use One for All. Except her lightning was pink. Pink, Izuku echoed absently, enraptured. How come you? All Might raised a brow inquisitively. How come I never sparkled? Why yeah. I never could actually, All Might said with a shrug and a sad smile. Mayim said I'd not too long after passing One for All down to me. A friend of hers trained me after that, since he knew about One for All too, but no matter what either of us tried, I never did manifest the lightning. We eventually just assumed it was something unique to her. Gran Torino told me I was just too blockhead to do anything more complex than punching bad guys, though. He chuckled. Gran Torino? Izuku asked. Sorry. My teacher. The one that took over for Mayim sir when she died. Oh, Izuku said. I'm sorry, All Might. All Might smiled. Don't be sorry, young Midoriya. I came to terms with the fact that I would never have lightning around me a long time ago. He reached out, burying one hand in Izuku's curls, which he ruffled mercilessly. That's not what I'm sorry for. Izuku bit his lip. Right, he said instead. What's it feel like then? Izuku blinked. One for All? He asked. All Might nodded. Like a storm, actually. Like when you step outside and it's about to storm and the air feels charged and heavy, that's what it feels like. Huh, All Might said. Guess it feels the same then. For me, every time I used One for All it felt like I was releasing built-up pressure. Actually, it always felt a little bit like that moment right before rain starts to fall. Izuku agreed with the sentiment. Actually, I was thinking about my quirk registration. Oh. I was thinking that maybe I should write the quirk down as something completely unrelated to what it is, but that still fits if that makes sense. That doesn't make sense, let me try again. I was thinking, nobody knows what your quirk actually is, but everybody assumes it's some sort of super strength or physical enhancement. I was thinking I should play more off the lightning motif, throw people off our trail a bit. Huh, All Might said. Actually, that sounds like a really good idea, my boy. Though I don't know how it would explain the super strength. I was thinking of calling it. Izuku broke off to seize his bottom lip between his teeth. I was thinking of calling it Inner Storm. All Might made a low whistling sound. It certainly sounds heroic and impressive, as far as quirk names go, my boy. Izuku smiled, ducking his head. Thanks. But I was thinking to describe the strength. I was thinking of going the manifestation route. How so? Well, I've tried turning it on a lot over the last week, and every time it sort of only works if first I think, I'm going to be a hero. So I thought that maybe writing that it's a manifestation of what I feel inside, like determination, hence Inner Storm. Besides, with an explanation like that, I think it would be a little easier to explain why it manifested 10 years late. Really? How do you figure, young Midoriya? Izuku averted his gaze. The sludge villain. I could say that I didn't have enough determination before. It would work out. All Might cleared his throat. Young Midoriya, are you sure you don't have an intelligence quirk? What? Why? This is very forward-thinking, my boy. When I received One for All, I just ran off to the quirk registration office, wrote down super strength on my form, and went about my life, unknowingly condemning myself to a career of deflecting every question any reporter ever asked me about my quirk, since it was clearly more than just super strength. He chuckled. Never in a million years would I have thought to just come up with a different name for the quirk and parameters that generally describe it. Before Izuku knew it, All Might was ruffling his curls again. You, young Midoriya, are so brilliant. I wouldn't go that far, All Might. This is just, I've spent my whole life investigating everything I can about quirks, since I didn't have one, so I just thought about how to describe One for All too. Well, my boy, I think that calling One for All Inner Storm on your form is a brilliant idea. In the meantime, how does it feel to move around like that? Izuku called on One for All again, letting it thrum through him at just 5% of what it could do. He'd only attempted this so far standing still, so he was a little surprised at how stiff he felt after just one step, every muscle in his body straining. He must have made a face, because All Might started laughing, his laugh transforming as he did, body beefing up as his hair straightened itself out. 5%? Let's jog the length of this beach, you and me. And they did. When All Might finally spared him, he collapsed into the sand, muscles screaming at him harder than they ever had in all their days of cleaning the beach, and he'd hauled fridges, with All Might on top of them, so that was saying something. Try to keep this up when you can, young Midoriya, All Might advised, crouching down into the sand next to him. I'm not going to be around as much anymore now. Izuku's head popped up instantaneously. What? All Might, why? All Might winced. Actually, young Midoriya, I took a teaching position at UA. You took a what at where? Why didn't you tell me? I didn't want it to change things. Besides, I'll always be a phone call away if you need my advice for anything. All Might pulled his phone out of his pocket, as if to punctuate the statement. Think it through, my boy. Why would I teach at UA? Izuku felt his eyes widen as the realization hit. Your time limit. It'll be easier to disguise that you can't do hero work as often this way. Right. And also, when One for All fully transfers to you, which it will, my boy, it will help for me to lie low too. And, Izuku added as another idea came into his head. If you work at UA, and if All for One is still alive, he'd suspect you were going to pass your quirk on to one of the students there. All Might smiled ruefully. That was the very first and foremost reason I ever took the job in the first place. Izuku felt like his eyes were going to bug out of his head, but before any words could tumble out of his mouth asking All Might why he chose him instead of one of them, a student that was already capable of holding his power, All Might held up a hand to stop him. I don't regret my decision to pass it on to you, young Midoriya. I never will. You're the perfect person to wield one for all, and you're going to be an amazing hero one day. And then he ruffled his hair again. Izuku cried. Izuku spent the next 3 weeks running along the beach, sparks of lightning flicking across his skin. He tried dancing too. He was terrible at it, but it required more coordination than running did and moved more of his body in more complicated ways, plus he could do it inside, so it was a good alternative when bad weather struck. He even scraped together what little allowance he had and went to a local dojo, where he was able to pay for one lesson on the basics of fighting. And then it was time for the Shiketsu High entrance exam. Izuku flew through the written portion, almost worried that it had been too easy. He double-checked and then triple-checked his work, and, finding no glaring evidence he had made any mistakes, set to preparing himself for the practical for the rest of the exam time. Realistically, even after months of training with All Might, Izuku knew that this was still going to be his weakest point. All Might told him that the UA entrance exam had been Battle Royale style since All Might himself had taken it. Students were released into mock cities in groups of roughly 50 and told to fight robots for points. Since Izuku wasn't taking the exam, All Might had also told him that there's an additional evaluating system in place at UA based on the students' aptitude at rescuing their fellow competitors. He'd also sworn Izuku to secrecy in regards to that hidden criteria, but it wasn't really like Izuku had anyone to tell. Kaken? No way was he voluntarily talking to Kaken. Besides, he'd already taken the exam. The Shiketsu practical, however, was much different. Examinees were sorted into groups of 10, completely at random. The 10 were taken to a mock city, much like in UA, but there were no robots here. Instead, there were people, trained professionals, highly skilled in hand-to-hand combat and also highly skilled in not hurting people unless they wanted to. These people had also signed waivers in case they got hurt and weren't permitted to use their quirks, even though the examinees were using theirs. Also, hidden. Somewhere in the city, there was a single civilian that was actually a life-size doll. Rescuing this civilian required only touching it, but it was supposedly very well hidden. The rules went like this. 10 examinees enter, and they're given 15 minutes. If the civilian is rescued before then that's when the exam ends for all 10 students. The catch is that there are about 75 villains in one area. It's about the size of a single block of a city, and they are instructed to attack on sight. Which meant, of course, that having the spare time to actually roam around a city looking for the civilian is statistically unlikely. The quickest way to get into Shiketsu was to find the civilian and rescue them. However, as the announcer very proudly pointed out as they read the rules, the civilian had only been found twice in the 16 years they've conducted the exam like this. Therefore, the much easier way to get into Shiketsu was by fighting the villains. Points were awarded per takedown and taken away if excessive force is used. It was quite straightforward, and everyone around Izuku was buzzing with the excitement of taking down as many villains as possible. Izuku, however, was fidgeting with the hem of his sleeve and trying to talk himself out of being insane. It wasn't working. See, Izuku, for better or for worse, grew up with Kaken. Kaken was volatile and mean and definitely a bully, but he also had a drive to win that was unchallenged by anyone else Izuku knew. However, Kaken really didn't like Izuku, which meant every time he wanted to challenge someone at dodgeball or in a race or to a fight, Izuku was always his first pick. Izuku suspected Kaken only really liked to do it because he got to see Izuku lose and then insult him, but Kaken wasn't here and Izuku had a quirk now, and well, Izuku had grown to appreciate a good challenge when he saw one. And finding that civilian sounded like one hell of a challenge. Besides, even though this was all hypothetical, the whole purpose of a hero was to save people. Fighting villains was only a side effect of that goal, not the main one. The whistle blew, and Izuku and the 9 people taking the test with him raced into the block. As suspected, all 9 of the other examinees ran for the first villains they saw. Izuku, for his part, went for the first fire escape. A quick scan of his surroundings had proven to him that there were not very many villains on the rooftops and many more on the ground level, so he had quickly decided he would make the rooftops his domain. It was pretty risky, honestly, to blow off the main objective of the exam, getting points, in such a big way, but, well. Here Izuku was climbing a fire escape with the intents of surveilling the city from on high and not fighting anyone unless he ran into them here. Once he reached the roof of the first building, he braced himself, running to jump over to the second when he caught movement in one of the windows of that building near the upper floor. He dropped on instinct, belly flat against the ground, body hidden by the ridge of the building. The villain looked around, eyes passing easily over where Izuku was hidden and then turned inwards, their back to the window. Well, Izuku did need points in case his plan failed, and he did need to actually check inside buildings for the civilian too, so he figured he might as well try this out. As to how he'd try it out, though, he had no idea. Actually, he had one idea, one very crazy idea. But he also had 15 minutes, so he wasn't going to waste time thinking of a saner one. Izuku straightened, cautious to make sure he was going unobserved by the villain in the window as well as all the others fighting on the ground. He was good, so he called one for all into his body and leapt, barely thinking as he did. Thankfully, barely thinking worked out for Izuku as he latched onto the windowsill above the one the villain had been standing at, arms throbbing with the strain of one for all and his entire body weight, though he was in no danger of losing his grip. He'd done too many push-ups in the last 10 months for that. Izuku put his feet against the wall and pushed outwards, peering down at the window below. The villain was still there, back still turned, apparently deaf since a teenage boy made of solid muscle just thumped rather solidly against the side of the building. Not that Izuku minded this guy's selective deafness, though, especially since it was working in his favor. He stretched his leg down, catching the edge of the window with his toe and gently pulling it upwards, as slowly and as steadily as possible. Surprisingly, its progress upwards was silent. Luck was really on Izuku's side today. He reached down, hooking his fingers on the upper rim of the window and began lowering himself. Once he had a good enough grip, he adjusted so that he could put his other hand there too, and then he lowered himself down until he was in front of the window, body curled underneath him as he held up his entire weight with just his arms. The villain still had his back turned. Because luck and barely thinking had gotten Izuku this far today, he decided to trust them yet again and attempt something he'd only ever seen in movies. He swung forward, stretching his legs out, and wrapped them around the villain's shoulders, effectively squashing his windpipe between Izuku's thighs. The villain made a noise of surprise, and then after a few seconds, tapped Izuku's leg 3 times. It was one of the yield signals they'd been instructed to use, so Izuku immediately let him go, taking the opportunity to drop himself the rest of the way into the room and give his arms a break. The villain gasped for air and turned to look at him. "Sorry, are you all right?" Izuku asked, whispering even though they were the only 2 in the room. There could be other villains outside, and if they heard voices they might come to investigate. "I've had worse," the villain whispered back, then flashed him a grin and a thumbs up. "That was great, kid. You executed that with the perfect amount of pressure, too." Izuku decided this probably wasn't a good time to mention that it was the first time he tried that move, so he just offered the villain a smile and a tiny nod, already moving to look around the room, which was his initial plan anyway. He'd hidden from a lot of bullies over the years, so he knew all the usual spots. This room had been outfitted to look like a hotel room, so he started, naturally, by looking under the bed. "Are you checking the room?" the villain asked, evidently curious. Apparently they weren't sworn to silence or anything upon their defeat. Which made sense. Izuku had seen enough villain fights where the villain kept blathering about evil plans and whatnot after being defeated. Which, come to think of it, his response to said villain blathering was probably part of the test too. He wondered if he'd lose points for fraternizing with the enemy or something. Given the scoring system of the exam was already sneaky and multifaceted, he decided that was a possibility. He settled for nothing more than a nod as he threw open the doors to the closet. "You better hurry up and get out of here, kid," the villain said. "No points to be had here." Izuku narrowed his eyes, deciding he didn't trust how suspicious that statement sounded. Also, he was the only villain here. The only villain he'd seen inside of a building, actually. Granted, he hadn't seen many buildings, but it seemed purposeful anyway. A guard, maybe? If he was a guard, then that meant that the civilian was most likely in this room. On top of that, the villain was trying to persuade him to leave. Izuku wouldn't put it past the school to maybe give this man instructions to try and talk a student out of leaving here if they first took him out, especially if the civilian really was here. He scanned over the room with new vigor. There was a vent near the ceiling, right in between two support beams. A vent, huh? Izuku had hidden in air vents before. Actually, air vents were almost always the best place to hide, since no one ever thought to check there. One for all coursed through him again and he pushed off the ground, catching the wall midway and using it to propel himself up to one of the beams, which he caught with his right arm. He braced his feet against the wall, and with his left he tugged at the air vent. It didn't budge, so he put a little of one for all behind it and ripped it free from its screws. Behind the air vent. "You've got to be kidding me," Izuku whispered as he reached out to grab the doll. A loud buzzer sounded all throughout the city. The civilian has been rescued. This exam is concluded. I repeat, the civilian has been rescued. This exam is concluded. Izuku checked his watch. They were only 4 minutes and 31 seconds in. "That was pretty cool, kid," the villain said, beaming up at him. "That was pretty cool." After their exam was completed, the arena was reset and civilian relocated and the next group was then sent in. As the 10 of them walked out, most of them crestfallen, Izuku shocked into next week, the group waiting stared. "That wasn't even 5 minutes, one girl exclaimed. Several people sighed at once. Someone found the civilian, a boy in the front grumbled. "Denohu. They won't fess up." They weren't about to wither if Izuku had any say in it. Which he did, since he was the person that found the civilian. "You 10, a teacher said, materializing out of thin air to stop Izuku's group. "Congrats on completing the exam. Which of you is Midoriya Izuku?" He read the name off the paper in front of him, but now he looked up, scanning the 10 of them for a response. The others all made awkward eye contact with each other, trying to ascertain which of them was Midoriya Izuku. Izuku himself stubbornly avoided each of the gazes directed at him. The teacher just kept gazing out over the group, patiently waiting for him to own his sins. When Izuku felt he could drag out this awkward silence no longer, he slowly raised a hand. "That's me." The teacher's face split into a wide grin. "A big, preemptive welcome to Shiketsu High to you, Midoriya-sen." All 9 of the others, and the other 10 waiting to go in nearby, stared at Izuku. Izuku started to redden under the attention. His arms twitched with the urge to hide his face, but that would probably only make the staring worse. He clasped his hands together in front of him to keep them there. "Thank you." The teacher laughed. There was something about his face that was tickling the back of Izuku's mind. He was most likely a pro, considering he was here at Shiketsu, but dressed in civilian clothes instead of his hero costume, it was incredibly hard to place him. "All right, Midoriya-sen, you hang here a moment. You 9, go straight ahead and then turn right at the sign. It should take you straight to the main hall." The others complied, shooting Izuku incomprehensible glances as they went. Some of them looked jealous, which was an unfamiliar expression directed at him. The others seemed like admiration, which, yeah, that was pretty unfamiliar too. Sensei," Izuku ventured when they were out of earshot. "Am I in trouble?" The man in front of him barked a laugh. "Are you kidding? You were incredible." "No, Midoriya-san, this is just me leaping at the chance to meet you. We haven't had somebody find the civilian in 11 years. Get a chance to meet Izuku. Like he's a celebrity of some sort. Oh, this was weird. And awkward. Weird and awkward. What was Izuku even supposed to say? Thanks. He said that once already." The teacher laughed like Izuku had just made a hilarious joke, not awkwardly stammered out thanks to a non-existent compliment. "I just wanted to warn you, too, Midoriya-san. The other kids are going to be talking about you." "Oh, Izuku." He should have expected that, honestly. He'd probably just ruined 9 of their chances to get into Shiketsu by ending their practical exam 10 minutes early. Everyone was most likely furious with him. "I was actually wondering." Izuku stopped himself, looking up at the teacher. He probably didn't really want to field questions from Izuku. That was the usual from teachers, anyway. To Izuku's moderate surprise, though, the man just nodded, giving him silent permission to continue. "I was wondering if any of the If any of the other students in my group, if they'll be able to get in still? His eyebrows crept upwards somewhat involuntarily in an expression of his surprise. Oh, wow. Are you really worried about them not getting in? Izuku shifted uncomfortably. I mean, I did just ruin their chances to get their own points. I wouldn't feel right if that meant they all failed. The man's gaze softened slightly. Well, there's still a chance. Obviously, as a hero, having prowess in combat is usually the most important thing. But there are heroes out there with quirks better suited to other aspects of the hero job, like healing quirks or rescue quirks. That's why we automatically accept the top 30 scores of students from the practical exam, with the prerequisite that they also pass the written exam. The other 10 slots in our hero program are decided after careful deliberation, based on a number of factors. That was a relief. Izuku was happy to know he hadn't inadvertently ruined 9 lives today. Though, by the sound of it, chances of the people in his group snagging one of those 10 slots were probably relatively slim still. But hey, you did great, Midoriya-san, the teacher said, shifting his clipboard so he could offer Izuku a thumbs up. You should go on down to the main hall now so you can acquaint yourself with some of your future classmates. I don't want you to be late for the final announcements. Okay, Izuku said. Thanks again. Sorry. I'm actually not sure, who you are. Don't sweat it, Midoriya-san, he said genially. The name's Kinetic. I'm not super well known, so I'm pretty used to some anonymity. Izuku couldn't help his eyes widening a bit at that. He should have known. He literally had yellow eyes and orange-brown hair not styled any differently than it was in his hero outfit. And Izuku called himself a fan. He bowed to the man in front of him, as deeply as he could without being weird. I'm so sorry, he said, bowing again for good measure. I should have recognized you. Kinetic laughed. Really, don't sweat it. I didn't know you taught at Shiketsu, Izuku said. Didn't you just open an agency? Kinetic rubbed the back of his neck. You know about that? Yeah. Izuku said, nodding vigorously. I mean, your legal battle with Endeavor was all over the news not too long ago. I always thought it was really brave of you to stand up for yourself the way that you did. I was rooting for you, you know. A lot of sidekicks never really strike out on their own, and even fewer sidekicks would have the guts to try to take on the number 2 hero. And maybe more people should have taken on the number 2 hero. He was so focused on fighting Grimace that he wasn't even bothering to watch out for collateral damage. I mean, there were how many people in that building? And they would all be dead if you hadn't redirected his flames at the last minute. Izuku suddenly became aware of the fact that Kinetic was blinking blankly at him, and he clamped his mouth shut, the embarrassment that had dissipated in his general excitement for heroes returning with a vengeance. He opened his mouth to start apologizing for word vomiting at the poor man about a topic that was probably a little sensitive for him when Kinetic cut him off with an easy smile. You really know your stuff. I'm sorry, it's just, most people don't even know my name, you know? Even with it being in the news a bit with that whole thing with Endeavor, people just don't know me. And if they do, it's as Endeavor's sidekick. Now former sidekick, I guess. Izuku shuffled his feet, extremely embarrassed. It's just, well, I love heroes, he explained. And you're my favorite kind of hero. Really? Yeah, Izuku affirmed, nodding along with his words as he said them. We call All Might the symbol of peace and justice, you know? But I think that all heroes are a sort of symbol. They hold society up. They're meant to be protectors above all else, so I like seeing heroes that embody that, in one way or another. If you want to call yourself a hero, I think it's important to stay true to those ideals: protection, peace, justice. Even if it means calling other heroes on their bullshit. Kinetic stared at Izuku, and a moment later, Izuku realized that he'd cussed in front of a teacher. Oh gods, he'd cussed in front of a teacher. He hadn't even been accepted to Shiketsu yet, and he was already going to have a detention. Kinetic barked a single laugh, and then put his hand on Izuku's head, much like how All Might often did. You, he said, interrupting himself to ruffle Izuku's curls, are going to be a wonderful hero. But right now, you really need to get to the main hall. Oh, right, Izuku said, ducking out from under his hand and shuffling in the direction he'd pointed the other 9 people from his group. Maybe Kinetic was just going to let the swear word slide, since Izuku wasn't technically a student yet? Yeah, that's probably what it was. Thanks, Kinetic. It was nice to meet you. It was nice to meet you too, Kinetic said. He sounded like he meant it too, which was a bit of another novelty to Izuku. It was something that started with All Might, people other than his mom saying they wanted to be around him, and meaning it. Izuku wondered if he'd ever get used to it. He probably wouldn't. As Izuku walked, he drifted into his thoughts. If he was honest with himself, he hadn't even expected to find the civilian, let alone rescue them and get the highest score. He definitely hadn't expected to use Taijutsu on one of the villains, or leap off of a building with very little in the way of planning other than a thought to grab that windowsill, for that matter. On another level, he was able to realize that his actions hadn't just been the result of a lot of really extreme luck converging on him all at once. Giving himself the high ground to check for anomalies had been a solid strategy, stopping to take out the guy in the room had been a solid strategy, and remaining in said room to investigate his behavior had been another solid strategy. But he also knew, on a third processing level, that he had painted something of a target on his back. The other 9 people in his group had probably already rushed back to circulate his name and his feats around to the other test takers. He knew how students gossiped, he'd always been the brunt of it, and everyone in there was probably going to have it out for him as soon as he walked in. To them, he probably wasn't just another competitor. He was the big fish. The guy that found the civilian. Essentially, he was a cheat code in a video game, get into Shiketsu the hard way by fighting for it tooth and nail, or get into Shiketsu the easy way, by hunting down one single civilian and taking not only 500 points, but the opportunity for more from the 9 people stuck in the ring with you. In other words, he should expect the worst from the other kids in this hall. Not that Izuku usually expected better than the worst from people his own age, just, usually, he was expecting the worst because of them and not because of something he had done. Izuku arrived at the hall in question and took a deep breath, steeling himself. And then he opened the door. That's him. That's the guy that rescued the civilian. Izuku winced. And so it began. That's so cool, someone near him proclaimed. What? Dude, how did you do it? Ah, Izuku said, very eloquently. You have to tell us. Wait, what's your name? You have to tell us your name. The teacher said Midoriya Izuku, someone offered, and Izuku recognized her as one of the girls in his group. Midoriya-kun. This voice belonged to a very tall boy, pushing his way through the crowd with ease, where he stopped in front of Izuku. There was a moment of silence where they stared at each other while Izuku stared up at him. Izuku knew he was on the short side, but honestly, how tall was this guy? And then the boy stiffened, slapped his hands to the back of his legs, and then slammed his forehead to the ground in a bow so forceful that Izuku heard the impact reverberating around the hall. My name is Yorashi Inasa. I'm so excited to meet you. Izuku said, then tried for a smile. It probably came out looking as wobbly and nervous as Izuku felt. Please, you don't have to do that. It's nice to meet you too. He glanced around. All in all, there was not actually a lot of hostility in this room. All of you actually. It's nice to meet all of you. Yorashi straightened, flashing a wide grin at Izuku. You're very hot-blooded for a hero, he shouted. Izuku blinked. What exactly did that mean? Midoriya-san, how did you do it? This was a new voice vying for attention, belonging to a boy even smaller than Izuku that had followed in Yorashi's wake, sort of like a duckling following after its mother. How'd you find the civilian? Oh, Whereas before everyone had been clamoring for his attention, now they all watched him raptly. It was very nerve-wracking. Incredibly nerve-wracking. Izuku decided he would tell this story to the ceiling, instead of while making eye contact with any of them. I wanted to rescue the civilian from the start, so I, climbed onto the roof of the first building I saw. And then I saw a guy in the next building over. One of the villains. Not that I needed to clarify that, but I did. Anyway, so I jumped over and then snuck in through the window he was standing by and He swallowed, decided he didn't need to mention the impromptu Taijutsu, and continued without that detail. I took him out. But then he was acting suspicious, so I checked the room for the civilian. It was, pretty lucky. I was extremely lucky, actually. Wait, you took out one of the mock villains in less than 5 minutes. That was another person that had been in his group. Everyone else was looking at them, stunned, which was nice because it meant they weren't looking at Izuku like that anymore. But then they all turned those stunned looks on Izuku, and they were right back to square one. Yeah. Izuku said, and then he trailed off when all of their faces shifted from incredulity, expressions full of wonder and jealousy and lots of things he didn't have the mental aptitude to place at the moment. It was, lucky. How'd you do it then? Yurashi asked. Or shouted. His only volume setting seemed to be as loud as possible. Izuku closed his eyes. He was apparently going to have to regale them with tales of impromptu taijutsu anyway. Certain death by social anxiety. What? Midoriya Izuku, 0. I was holding myself up using the window, so I just... You know. They stared at him expectantly. I just wrapped my thighs around his windpipe while he wasn't looking and then he yielded. It was just luck, honestly. I hadn't even tried that before. It could have gone terribly. They should probably take points off my score because of it. Once again, Izuku was met with silence, but unfortunately a few of those expressions were shifting again to something he didn't know. A few people glanced down, not so subtly, at his legs. A few people were blushing. No one seemed to know what to say. Izuku wanted to die. Thankfully, at that moment, the doors opened to admit a new group and Izuku was able to slip away, finding himself a seat in the back corner of the room, where very few people were. Most of them immediately started questioning the newcomers like they had Izuku, and said newcomers responded in like. Izuku cast a small smile their way, glad to see them so enthusiastic about recounting their own exam. That was probably just because they didn't have to admit to gripping someone in a stranglehold with their thighs, though. Izuku tensed as he became aware of someone looming over him, not all that uncommon given his past, but he still jumped at the sheer volume of the person's voice when it sounded. I like you. Izuku jumped so bad he nearly fell out of his chair. Clutching at his chest where his heart was hammering away, Izuku looked up to find Yurashi standing above him, beaming like an idiot. Izuku couldn't help but smile a little himself as he reclaimed his chair. Yeah, you seem really cool too. Thank you, he said, either not noticing or not caring about what was probably the single most awkward sentence ever uttered to him. Do you have a favorite hero? Oh yeah, All Might is definitely my favorite. Yurashi gave him a double thumbs up. Everyone loves All Might. He's such a hot-blooded hero, what's not to love? And there it was again. Hot-blooded. I agree, Izuku said, but, what do you mean by hot-blooded? Yurashi's expression soured, and for a moment Izuku thought it had something to do with what he said, but then Yurashi started talking, a lot, about how he fell in love with passionate heroes when he was a kid. He said Endeavor was his favorite until he met him. Yurashi described Endeavor's eyes as cold as he slapped the autograph board out of Kid Yurashi's hands, and said that's what made him decide he wanted to be warm and hot-blooded as a hero. So, you mean it as a compliment, then? Izuku said, nodding along as he finished the story. Then he breathed a sigh of relief. I was a little worried for a moment. Yurashi laughed. Of course it's a compliment. Without passion, what's the point of living? Of being a hero? Of helping people? There is no point. Right? Izuku said, because he didn't know what else to say. This was probably the longest conversation he'd had with someone his age since he was 4, which was, wow, that was pretty sad. Let's be friends. Izuku started again. He was going to have to stop doing that, since Yurashi apparently wasn't going to stop shouting things in his ears. Wait a minute. Did Yurashi just ask to be friends? Friends with Izuku? Really? There was no way. No way at all. Izuku realized belatedly that Yurashi was staring at him, waiting on a response, something dark falling over his expression like he thought Izuku was going to say no or something, which, oh no, he thought Izuku was going to say no to being friends and, I'd like that. Izuku shouted, almost as loudly as Yurashi had shouted at him, and immediately he felt his cheeks going red with embarrassment. This wasn't good. What if Yurashi thought he was making fun of him, or Yurashi clapped him on the back hard enough to almost knock him out of the chair again. That's great. I'm so happy. This worked so much better than it did last time. Izuku straightened himself in his chair again, then blinked up at Yurashi. Last time? Oh, Yurashi declared, and he vaulted over the chairs to settle in the one next to Izuku. Izuku sensed there was probably another story coming his way. Probably an equally long and loud one too at that. I actually applied to UA too. Oh, that's cool, Izuku said, nodding. UA was always my dream school when I was a kid. It's pretty close to where I live, and all the best heroes. He cast a sideways glance at Yurashi, remembering that speech about the flame hero earlier. Excluding, Endeavor, that is, I wouldn't call him the best, per se, graduated from there, so I thought it would be cool to go too. I realized that Shiketsu was more for me when I inherited the number 1 hero's quirk. Got older though. Me too, Yurashi said, nodding vigorously. What changed my mind was Endeavor's son though. I, wasn't really aware he had a son. Well, I knew he had children, but I didn't think any of them were our age. His youngest son is, Yurashi said, folding his arms across his chest. He told me to stay out of his way at the entrance exam for UA's recommended students. He had eyes just like his father's. Oh, Izuku said, because he didn't know what he was supposed to say to that. He honestly didn't know much about Endeavor's family at all, so he had no idea what the kids were like. And Yurashi seemed slightly biased, so it would probably be best if Izuku reserved judgment. Assuming he ever met one of the Todoroki kids, which didn't seem all too likely. Actually no. If one of them was their age and attending UA, because it was relatively safe to assume that the son of Endeavor would get into UA, then that meant Izuku would probably meet him at some point. At least when they went pro, if not sooner. Assuming Izuku lived that long, considering the existence of evil overlords that were after his quirk and whatnot. Which was a very morbid thing to be thinking about while trying to have a conversation with someone else. Yeah, Yurashi agreed. It was very cold-blooded. It was also kind of mean, you know? Yeah. It sort of reminded Izuku of Kaken, actually. Or at least of how Kaken went around calling everyone else extras, or useless, but that was a name he reserved for Izuku specifically. Izuku was all too familiar with the way that words could cut right to the core of your being, even worse than bruises and burns could. Yurashi looked over at him, looking like he was about to say something else. Izuku panicked. After a revelation like that, he didn't trust himself to keep logically discussing Endeavor or his son who was apparently like Kaken. No, stop that, Izuku, so he asked Yurashi the first thing that came to his mind instead. So, what's your quirk? Yurashi beamed like a kid in a candy shop, and Izuku breathed an inner sigh of relief. At least he'd taken the impromptu topic change well. It's called Whirlwind. I can create and direct wind currents. Oh, wow, that sounds incredibly applicable. I bet it would be perfect for moving debris in a rescue. Yurashi laughed. I think so too. What about you? What's your quirk? Izuku hesitated. Other than the awkward explanation he'd offered All Might, this was the first time he was going to do this, talk about his quirk, lie about his quirk. But he needed to be good at this. He'd never been good at lying, but it was time to get good, or else. Izuku took a deep breath, and then offered Yurashi his best smile. He held up his hand, allowing one for all to flare to life in just one of his fingers, green sparks flying across it. Yurashi stared, clearly enraptured by this casual display of power. Izuku closed his fist, cutting off the flow of the energy within him as he did. I call it inner storm, he said, and he sounded calm. Somehow, he sounded calm. It lets me manifest the energy I carry inside me with the force of powerful storm. So that was lightning? Yurashi asked, grinning at him. Yes. Midoriya-kun, you and I are gonna make a great team one day, I just know it, Yurashi said. We both already have elemental quirks. I bet they're super compatible too. Why no? I bet I could make you fly around in a windstorm while you rain down lightning on everyone around you. Izuku frowned. He hadn't actually tried to direct the sparks of lightning that clung to him when he used his quirk, but he wondered if he could. Maybe that was worth looking into? He was about to respond when someone walked out on stage. This someone, Izuku recognized even out of costume. The snakes in her hair were a dead giveaway. "Does Iwabumi work at Shiketsu?" Izuku asked Yurashi. To his surprise, Yurashi responded at a normal volume. "She teaches public relations classes here." Izuku breathed out a sigh and tried to rein in his inner fanboy a little bit. He was at a hero school, after all. He was going to meet a lot of pro heroes, and he shouldn't be doing it in cold sweats while stammering every other word. "So cool," he whispered, and Yurashi laughed back to his normal volume already. "Welcome everyone," Iwabumi said, smiling kindly in their direction and offering a small wave. One of the snakes in her hair waved too, which, honestly, was cute and charming in a way that Izuku hadn't thought Iwabumi could be. The crowd murmured back a relatively tame hello excluding Yurashi, who shouted it, and Iwabumi smiled. "Well, seems we have a lively bunch this year," she said. Izuku doubted it was a lively bunch so much as it was a lively Yurashi, but he kept this and his small, amused smile at the thought to himself. This was an eventful round of testing. "Oh, I'm sorry. Some of you latecomers might not have heard yet. We actually had someone rescue the civilian this time around." An extra round of applause goes out to Midoriya Izuku. "Oh sheet. They were announcing this?" "Oh double sheet." Everyone had turned to stare at him again as they clapped for him. To make matters worse, Yurashi decided to practically knock Izuku out of his chair again with another clap to his back. "Now, just to rehash some things, lovelies," Iwabumi continued, clapping her hands together as she did. "Each villain you officially take down grants you 50 points, and you earn 1 additional point for every minute you survive a fight with one. You lose 1 point from your total score for every time you damage property unnecessarily, and 1 point from your total score for every time you use excessive force against a villain. If you manage to rescue the civilian, you are granted 500 points. Our acceptance policy works as follows. First, you must pass the written exam to be considered at all. Then, the top 30 scores from the practical exam are accepted automatically, provided they pass the written portion. The other 10 slots for our Hero Core students are chosen at our discretion, based on written exam scores, practical exam scores, and judgment calls made during the practical exam. Because the 14th simulation ended at 4.5 minutes, we'll also take that time reduction into consideration. We pride ourselves on our speed here at Shiketsu, so you'll all know if you made it in by the end of the week." A cheer went up in the crowd, though Izuku did not participate. He just smiled to himself, content with watching and waiting. Iwabumi made a few more closing announcements, then wished them all luck and sent them on their way. Yurashi walked with Izuku back to the locker room. Everyone had put their stuff to take the practical exam, then continued walking with him out of Shiketsu, chatting about this or that the whole way. Izuku eyed the taller boy subtly as he talked. It wouldn't be the first time that someone had asked to be friends with Izuku just for it to end up being a trick, but Yurashi seemed genuine. Maybe it was because he was incapable of talking quiet, or the look he gave when Izuku took too long to answer his friendship request, but Izuku wanted to believe him. And maybe it was naive to do this after all the times he'd been proven wrong over and over again in middle school, but Izuku always wanted to have hope that maybe people were different elsewhere. "Would you like my number?" he asked Yurashi, once he paused for a breath in between stories. "So that we can stay in touch after this? If we both get in, I think that it would be nice to see a friendly face, you know?" Yurashi beamed, and something about the way he smiled was familiar to Izuku. It reminded him a bit of himself, and he wondered if maybe Yurashi didn't have many friends either. "Yes, that's a great idea." Izuku nodded and fished his phone out of his pocket, opening up the Contacts app and passing it over to Yurashi, who eagerly typed in his number. Once he was done, he handed Izuku's phone back to him, and Izuku, suddenly inexplicably nervous, opened a messaging channel with Yurashi and sent him a simple hi. "I sent you a message so that you'd have mine. My number, I mean." Yurashi pulled his own phone out then to check, still beaming. "I got it. It was great talking to you, Midoriya-kun." Izuku felt himself sag in relief. Yurashi had actually given him his real number. That was well, it wasn't a first, but it was a first for someone doing it voluntarily and not because they'd been stuck on a group project with Izuku instead. It was great talking to you too, Izuku said, as he boarded his train. Yarashi just grinned and waved enthusiastically, continuing even after the train started moving. He was a good guy, Izuku thought. And he thought he had the makings of a good hero. A nice, hot-blooded one. Izuku laughed quietly to himself as he took his seat. I ended up with the most points of all examinees, I'm pretty sure, Izuku said into the phone. The back corner of this bus had relative privacy, but he still wasn't about to start yelling about his exam for all the world to hear. That seemed counterintuitive to the whole reason he'd taken the Shiketsu exam instead of UA's. All Might made a sound on the other end of the line that sounded suspiciously like the squawking sounds Izuku's mom made when she was fussing over him. That's incredible, my boy. Tell me everything. Izuku looked around again. The only other people on the train right now were several seats in front of him and focused on their own problems. He tucked the phone tighter to his face, turning slightly so he was looking out the window as he talked. It was a simulation, he said, and launched into a thorough explanation of all the events that had transpired at the practical exam. You crushed his windpipe with your thighs? All Might interrupted, voice incredulous. Izuku instinctively shushed him, remembered they were on the phone, and it didn't matter how loudly he declared Izuku crushed a poor fake villain with his thighs, and paled considerably. I don't know. It was the first thing I thought of doing when I was hanging from the window by my arms. Like those old American spy movies. All Might chuckled. Sounds to me like you already have an ultimate move, my boy. Izuku laughed. No way. I'm not making thigh crush, smash. An ultimate move. It would certainly set you apart from me, All Might said, laughing lightly as he did. I definitely never crushed any windpipes with my thighs. Izuku cut himself off with a groan. You can't just say that stuff. Come on, it's embarrassing. It's all about assets, my boy. If crushing people between your thighs happens to be one of yours, you should own it. I know my Mster did, anyway. Don't tell me that she, thigh-jutsu'd people too? Once or twice. You're very similar to her, I think. Scrappy, with much more of a head for strategy than I'll ever have. Izuku felt color rising up to his cheeks. I wouldn't say that. I'm just lucky, I guess. I just do things and they end up working. I wouldn't exactly call it a well-thought-out plan. Well, your ability to act when no one else will has always set you apart, young Midoriya. It's why I chose you after all. Izuku ducked his head, even though All Might wasn't there to see it. Maybe I'll think about the thigh-crushing thing then. As a special move. All Might laughed so hard he quickly started coughing. Izuku winced, apology at the ready for when he was done, but before he got the chance, All Might continued speaking. You know, my boy, I think you should start calling me by my name. What? My real name. It would be best for discretion, you know. But, your real name, it's a closely guarded secret, isn't it? You can't just. Yagi Tashinori, All Might said, interrupting him swiftly. That's my name. And it is a closely guarded secret, but I trust you, my boy. Besides, the fact that it's so closely guarded means that no one will recognize it when you talk to me. Yagi-sensei, Izuku said, rolling the name around on his tongue as he tried it out. There was silence for a moment, then All Might said, now that's something I never thought I'd hear. Oh. I'm proud of you though, my boy. You've come a long way from the quirkless kid that ran headfirst into battle just because no one else would. And if I'm not mistaken, and I'm not, you'll come a long way still. Thank you, Yagi-sensei, Izuku murmured. Are you excited to be attending Shiketsu? It's a very prestigious school, you know. Actually, I've heard that their entrance exam is harder than UA's. I can see how it might be, Izuku said. Also, technically, I haven't actually been accepted yet. Though it was implied. Heavily implied. Anyway, the concept behind the UA entrance exam is straightforward enough. Even though the examinees don't know about the rescue point system, as long as they take down robots, they know that they have a chance of getting in. The Shiketsu exam was not straightforward at all. Focus on fighting villains the whole time, and if you fight enough or take down enough, you can get in. Or you could forego the fighting and go for the golden egg. You know, the civilian rescue. Which you did. Yeah, but I got lucky that I just happened to see that guy in the window, just happened to drop in to take him out, just happened to find the civilian in the room. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of luck, my boy. Besides, from what you told me already, that's not all there was to it. You avoided detection by the villain, you exercised stealth, you tried out a new move since it had a high probability of succeeding. You haven't told me the rest yet, since I got distracted by some, details, he chuckled. But I'm sure the civilian doll wasn't just hanging in plain sight for you to find, which meant you had to solve a puzzle when you looked for it. Am I right, young Midoriya? Izuku relented to the praise, but only because this conversation would go in circles forever if he didn't. The civilian was in the air vents, he said. But I've spent a lot of time hiding from other people, so… He probably shouldn't have said that. It was a little dark. Young Midoriya, Yagi said, like he was giving a small child a stern talking to, which actually wasn't that far off from what was happening. Use every tool you have in your arsenal and then some. Your past may have been troubled, and that's not right, it will never be right, but if you can use that past to help people in the future, then you should use it, and without shame. Everything you learn, the good and the bad, can be applied to hero work. Izuku leaned his forehead against the window, biting his lip to fight back tears. It wouldn't be the first time he'd cried in public, but he would rather not make any more of a habit of it than it already was. He decided a change of topic was probably for the best. How are things going with UA acceptance? He asked. The thank you went unsaid, but he knew that Yagi would hear it anyway. They're going extraordinarily well, he said, the smile evident in his voice. This is going to be an exciting batch of first years, this time around. Though I must admit, part of me still wishes you would be amongst them, young Midoriya. I'm sorry, he whispered. There's nothing to be sorry for, my boy. Never apologize for being smarter than an old man. You're not old, Yagi-sensei. He laughed heartily. I beg to differ, young Midoriya. All I meant was that I know UA was always your dream. I feel bad, I suppose, for depriving you of it, so to speak. It was my choice to go to Shiketsu instead, Izuku reminded him. My idea. And it's a much better one than mine ever was. Anyway, duty calls. I'll talk to you again soon, my boy. Izuku smiled. I'll talk to you soon, Yagi-sensei. The letter came in the mail on Thursday. Izuku's mom saw it first and brought it to him, already crying, so frantic that she tripped over herself presenting it to him. Despite getting what was probably the highest score in years, Izuku was still inexplicably nervous. There was always the chance that he'd failed the written portion, after all. His hands shook as he opened it. His mom, though he loved her, lurking over his shoulder to read it with him didn't help settle his nervousness. Izuku drew in a sharp intake of air when he saw the first line. Midoriya Izuku, we're honored to announce your acceptance into the Hero Academia at Shiketsu High. You got in. My baby got into Shiketsu, his mom shouted, latching onto his shoulders and shaking him, crying all the while. Izuku couldn't help a relieved laugh from escaping him. I got in, he repeated disbelievingly. Mom, I'm going to be a hero. You're going to be a hero, she said, smooshing his cheeks with both her hands. I'm so proud of you, Izuku. Thank you, Izuku said, covering her hands with his own. He was crying too. I can't believe I did it, Mom. I can, she said, pulling him in to give him a gentle forehead kiss. That's my baby. You've always been so determined. Mom, you're making me cry, Izuku protested weakly. She laughed and pulled away, wiping at her own tears with her fingers. I'm going to make some katsudon for dinner tonight, to celebrate. That sounds good, Izuku said, wiping at his own tears as she retreated to the kitchen to get started. He'd done it. He'd gotten in. Izuku woke up to his phone buzzing with an incoming text message the next day. It was an odd occurrence, too early for his mom to send her customary, at work now, text, and still too late for it to be Yagi, who seemed to wake up, typically, an hour after Izuku did for school. Which meant that it was tempting enough for Izuku to forego the other half hour of sleep he usually got in favor of reading the message. He blinked blearily at his too bright phone screen, trying to make out the name of the contact. Izuku jolted awake all at once. It was Yurashi. Yurashi had texted Izuku. Somehow, even though Izuku had given him his number, he hadn't actually expected Yurashi to use it. He hadn't expected him to make any effort to be his friend outside of the entrance exam. Izuku looked at the message with a little thrill of excitement. Friend, he had a friend, and smiled when he saw that it was a picture of an acceptance letter. Yurashi had gotten in too. Izuku typed up a response at lightning speed. Izuku 5:34 a.m. Congratulations. That's amazing. Izuku 5:34 a.m. I got in too. The letter came yesterday, laughing face. To his surprise, Yurashi responded equally as fast. Yurashi Inasa 5:34 a.m. That's great. Supposedly I got the second best score overall. I'm guessing first was you? Izuku 5:35 a.m. Yeah. That is indeed a thing that happened. How Izuku managed to sound awkward and embarrassed even in text format he had no idea. He cringed. Gods, he needed lessons in talking to people his own age or something. Yurashi Inasa 5:35 a.m. Always so humble, Midoriya-kun. Izuku didn't really know what to say to that. Thankfully, he didn't have to say anything, because as he was drafting his response, Yurashi flooded his phone screen with walls upon walls of text. Most of them were about shiketsu. One of them was about pomegranates. Another was about centipedes. Izuku read them as he brushed his teeth, not sure if he was even supposed to respond or not. Before he could, Yurashi texted him a long-winded goodbye, explaining that he had to go to class. Well then. Izuku texted his own goodbye, electing to not respond to any of the previous paragraphs, seeing as he still didn't really know what to say, and made his way to Aldra Junior High. The change was immediate when Izuku walked into school that day. Normally, he walked these halls like a ghost, overly aware of anyone that passed near him, but mostly invisible to them all the same. Something was different today, though. People stopped what they were doing to stare at him. Conversations dropped off as he walked past. The whispers were back in full force today too. Usually Izuku only heard them when someone new moved to the school and needed the scoop. That's Midoriya, he's quirkless, you don't want to accidentally sit near him at lunch or anything. No one was new today though. And the mentions of his quirklessness were joined by something else. That's Midoriya, he's quirkless, he somehow cheated the shiketsu exam. Right? Because quirkless people weren't supposed to be able to achieve anything without it being a fluke. Izuku had never even been allowed to be intelligent, something that had exactly nothing to do with having a quirk or not. If he scored anything higher than average, he was immediately cornered by a teacher and told that he should either say who he cheated off of or expect a detention. He always got the detention. On the bright side, though, it only took him 6 of these detentions to learn how to get enough answers right and enough intentionally wrong to be perfectly average. By the time Izuku had slid open the door to his classroom, he'd counted 10 people that were staring at him with enough hostility to warrant taking a different route than usual back home today. If he was hoping for a reprieve in class, though, he didn't get it. As soon as he stepped inside, every gaze in the room zeroed in on him. That was at least 5 more hostile parties he had to look out for then, judging by their expressions. And one said hostile party was Kaken, so Izuku would be better off finding a nice, small place to hide once class was done instead. Kaken never did have the patience for hide and seek. Midoriya-sen, his teacher said, and Izuku looked to him. 6 hostile parties in here. Then, though the teacher wasn't necessarily a threat on the way home so much as a bottomless detention dispenser. Go to the principal's office. Izuku did not audibly sigh. Izuku did not do much of anything, just shift his gaze so it was pointed at the clock behind the teacher's head and not at him directly. Am I in trouble for something? He asked. He hated how empty his voice sounded as he asked it. So defeated. So resigned. Midoriya-san, his teacher quipped, like he should know better than to ask a question. All right, Izuku said. He should know better than to ask. He existed and he was quirkless. That was always reason enough for him to be in trouble. Still, cheeks flaming with indignation and embarrassment, he bowed stiffly to his teacher and left the room again. Unfortunately, the path to the principal's office was one that Izuku was intimately familiar with. Izuku knocked, politely, on the principal's door. He heard the man clear his throat on the other side. It's open. Izuku opened the door and stepped inside, the principal's plastic smile already contorting into something complicated as soon as he saw him. "I was told to come here," Izuku said, closing the door behind him. "Ah yes, Midoriya-san," he said, gesturing to the seat in front of his desk. Izuku took it, used to this dance already. "How are you doing today?" "Well, I hope." "I'm fine," Izuku said blankly. Frankly, he probably could have told this man that his entire family had died in a villain attack an hour ago and he would probably smile at him and nod politely anyway. That's good. Anyway, I wanted to talk to you about your score on the Shiketsu High Entrance exam." Izuku didn't say anything, just waited for him to go on. "How did you do so well?" What he meant to ask was, "How did you cheat?" And they both knew it. Shiketsu was too important to Izuku for him to just roll over and play these games like usual, though. Surveillance. Calculated risk-taking. Clever applications of my quirk. A near-perfect score on the written portion. "You don't have a quirk, Midoriya-san," the principal said, very slowly, like he was talking to a toddler. "And given your performance at this school, I'd wager that getting a near-perfect score on the written portion is not possible unless you had outside help of some kind." What he meant to say was, "You cheated your way in, just tell me how and this will be easier for you," and they both knew it. "If you checked my quirk registry, you would see that I do actually have a quirk," Izuku said. He didn't bother correcting him on his judgment of the written portion. It would just fall on deaf ears anyway. The principal huffed and adjusted his half-moon glasses, but apparently decided to humor Izuku. Probably just so that he could spin his monitor around and move Izuku's quirklessness back in his face. He sat back as he read Izuku's recently updated quirk registration form, though clearly both surprised and displeased that there was a quirk listed there now. "What's this inner storm?" he asked. "That's my quirk," Izuku said. It was a cheeky thing to say, Izuku knew. He also knew that it would more than likely result in a detention slip later. He also couldn't entirely bring himself to regret it. "Show it to me," the principal said. He sounded appropriately displeased, which meant, yeah, there was definitely a detention coming Izuku's way. Really, the best way to show him one for all would be to snap his desk in half with a punch, but Izuku didn't think that would be appreciated. So, instead, he settled for the same demonstration he'd given Yurashi at the exam. Sparks of green lightning dancing across his skin, nothing more, nothing less. Though unlike with Yurashi, Izuku demonstrated using his whole right hand this time, holding it up for the principal to see easily. The principal's eyes tracked the sparks of lightning almost greedily. It was a look that Izuku absolutely did not like having directed at him. It was the same look that people gave particularly tantalizing pieces of meat on the plate in front of them, or golden medals that they were competing to win. And that feeling only worsened when the principal spoke, his plastic grin back in full now, and noticeably uncomplicated. "That's one flashy quirk." "Yes," Izuku said, because now that he'd been treated like a used dish rag and a diamond in the span of the same conversation, he wanted nothing more than to leave this room. The principal's grin sharpened. "Well, Midoriya-san, congratulations on your acceptance to Shiketsu, with the top score of all examinees, no less. Between you and Bakugo-san, Aldra has quite the prestigious lineup of graduates. A dish rag, a diamond, and a comparison to Kaken." "Thanks," Izuku said, his voice hard and flat in a way he was pretty sure his voice was not meant to be. "I need to go back to class." "By all means," the principal said, laughing. It was a big, booming laugh. The sort of laugh that was usually directed at others, rather than used with them. "I wouldn't want to interfere with your education." "Of course you wouldn't." "Thanks," Izuku said again, standing and bowing stiffly before making a beeline for the door. He didn't go to class immediately, though. He went to the bathroom, locked himself inside a stall, and proceeded to work himself through a series of breathing exercises as he tried to calm his racing mind. All it took was a quirk. Years and years of scrambling to be recognized, of trying to be friendly to everyone even as they kicked him in the ribs and shoved him into lockers, and all it took was a quirk. All it took was a quirk, and the principal had stopped accusing him of cheating and started congratulating him on his score. Before, Izuku was nothing. Now, Izuku was nothing but a quirk. "I'm sorry for asking," Izuku whispered into his phone receiver that night. His mom wasn't at home, but he was being quiet anyway, in case she came back early. It was a good thing, too, considering how long it had taken Izuku to get home today. Kaken had been a little more persistent in finding him after class than usual. "It's not that, my boy," Yagi said on the other end of the line. "I don't mind you asking, it's just, I don't quite understand why you're so pressed about it. I just don't want that school to have my name. I don't want any of my success at the Shiketsu entrance exam to be linked to Aldra Junior High. I got into Shiketsu because of your help and my own hard work. It had nothing to do with them. Young Midoriya, you graduate in a week. Why should it matter if your success is inadvertently linked to your previous school? Because that school is awful." Izuku's voice rose, without his consent, and he fought to pull it back down. "That school is awful," he repeated more sedately. "The quirk-based discrimination is extremely bad there. I don't want somebody to hear that the top hero course student at Shiketsu came from there and think it's a good place to send their kid. Besides, the more of myself that didn't have one for all that's erased, the better, right? That's how you did it." Yagi was silent for a long moment. "I don't disagree," he finally said at the end of it. "It would be better to erase your pre-quirk past, but, young Midoriya, what's this really about?" Izuku took a deep breath. He forced himself to calm down. This was Yagi. This was the first and only person that ever believed in Izuku before he got his quirk. He could trust him. He had too. "Yagi-sensei, did you ever get used to it?" "Used to what, my boy?" He sounded patient. It smoothed out knots in Izuku's shoulders that he didn't even know were there. "Used to being nothing more than a quirk that wasn't even yours." Izuku pulled his knees up onto the chair with him, then rested the side of his cheek against them. "Used to other people deciding your validity as a person based on the strength of your quirk. Used to never being enough, then all of a sudden being everything everyone else ever wanted." Yagi was silent for a long time after that, and then he exhaled, breathy and loud, crackling through Izuku's phone speakers. "Oh my boy. I'm so sorry. I forgot." "You forgot?" Izuku echoed quietly, confused. "Did I ever tell you that I was quirkless before I inherited one for all too?" Izuku straightened instantly, lowering one of his knees. "No. Why didn't you say anything before now?" Yagi laughed, a big, hearty laugh despite his frail frame. "I just hadn't gotten a good chance to yet, my boy. But I was. And I went through everything you went through too. I think a lot of people build their identities around their quirks. I think that includes us, who built our identity around being quirkless, in one way or another. Spending a lifetime quirkless means that getting a quirk, getting something else to identify ourselves with, can be jarring." "I was thinking too," Izuku said, "about how it's sort of not right. I was always aware of it before, I was always aware that people decided my worth and what profession I should have, and lots of other things I can't tell you about. Based on the quirk I didn't have, but getting one, suddenly being told by everyone that I could have the dreams that I'd always been denied before. It makes you feel like you don't have worth outside of a quirk," Yagi finished for him. Izuku took a shaky breath in and closed his eyes. "Yeah. Well, young Midoriya, all I can say is that it never really goes away. There will always be people that look at you and see your quirk first and everything else later, if they see it at all. But there will also be people that see what's underneath and value it too. I will be the first to admit that our specific quirk can be a burden, in more ways than one. I'll be there to help you shoulder it, though, and down the line, when you find people you can trust, they will be there to do the same." "Thanks, Yagi-sensei," Izuku murmured, hugging his legs a little tighter to his chest. "I think I needed to hear that." "Anytime, young Midoriya. And if you really want, I can set my team on your name like you asked too. Get it off the records at Aldra and everywhere else." "I haven't noticed any that have it in there," Izuku said, biting his lip. "But if you see any news articles about the sludge villain that has my name in them, you might want to pull those too. But that's about covering up my connection to you more than anything else." "Not a bad idea, my boy. Not that I'd expect one from you at this point." Yagi chuckled. Izuku hid his blush in his knees even though there was no one there to see it. Thanks, he said. I have to go though. Homework and all that. Yagi chuckled again. You take care, my boy. You too, Izuku murmured, and then he ended the call. Izuku stood, maybe intending to go to the bathroom, maybe intending to actually do homework. He flopped onto his bed instead, then rolled over, staring up at the ceiling. And then, because he was him, he started ripping through all the thoughts clogging up his mind, methodically, one at a time, until he could come to a conclusion that satisfied him. The first conclusion that he came to was that, yes, he was glad that Yagi had offered him one for all. As much as Izuku liked to hope and dream before, he knew that getting into a hero program while quirkless would have been extremely difficult, if not impossible. And of all the quirks he could have possibly gotten, one for all, the quirk that had previously belonged to All Might, was the best. A quirk devoted entirely to the pursuit of justice, a quirk that had belonged to countless people before him that had been willing to die just so that others could have peace of mind. That was the sort of quirk that Izuku had always dreamed about. Which meant Izuku could and would put up with all the people that were going to look at him now and only see a flashy quirk. The second conclusion that he came to, though, was that he needed to be on guard for those people. Actually, he thought that it would be a good idea to be on guard around all people. The fact of the matter was this. He loved his borrowed power, he loved his quirk, but it was a dangerous one. It had painted a target on Izuku's back, and that target could easily spread to other backs too, if they got too close to him. He had to protect his past from people as well. The person he used to be, scared, timid, quirkless. He knew he could never really leave that Izuku behind. But he could do his best to hide him. Izuku had always been good at hiding, after all. The third conclusion that he came to was this. He would make it better. All the quirk discrimination that happened, all the suffering, all the trials and tribulations, Izuku would heal them, somehow. Not right away, but one day. One day when he could step out of All Might's shadow, he would use this power to help all those people that were like him once. All Might had used one for all to become a beacon, bright, and burning. Brilliant. The country's shining symbol of peace and justice, that saved people with a smile on his face and a heart in his hand. Izuku didn't know what the future held for him, but he hoped, maybe, that he could use one for all to become a symbol of hope. A shield that protected people from something worse than villains. Maybe then he could nudge society in the right direction. Maybe then he could save the people that he couldn't reach. Maybe then he could be his own hero. I'm surprised you left so many of your All Might posters behind, Izuku, his mom said as she helped him hang one on his wall. There was a reason for that, though Izuku couldn't exactly say, oh yeah, by the way mom, my quirk is actually his and now I'm really paranoid about people discovering that, so I'm really trying to dial the fanboy thing back to more manageable levels. Izuku smiled instead. It was easy for him to hide behind smiles. All Might is my favorite hero, and my biggest inspiration. But I want to leave room for the other heroes that inspire me too. His mom was oddly silent, so he taped down the corner he was working on and looked over at her. She looked back at him, eyes watering dangerously, face pinched. He groaned immediately, recognizing that look. Mom, please don't start crying now. If you cry, then I'll cry and we'll never get these posters up. She sniffled and wiped at her eyes. Okay, I won't cry. I promise I won't cry. It's just, you've grown up so much, Izuku. I'm so proud of you. He smiled and pulled her into a one-armed hug, still holding the poster up with his other arm. Izuku had grown a bit since he graduated middle school. Not a lot, he was definitely nowhere near Yurashi's height and probably never would be. Speaking of Yurashi, Izuku heard a bang in the room next to him that sounded suspiciously like Yurashi's head hitting the floor. He liked Yurashi, he was a great friend, but he was living in the dorm room next to Izuku's, so he doubted that he would have any semblance of peace or quiet, ever, and his mom felt a lot smaller tucked against his side than she used to. Thank you for helping me move in, Mom, he said to the top of her head. His shirt was feeling a little damp, so he was almost certain that she had already broken her promise not to cry. He became certain when she sniffled enormously against him. I know it's a little hard for you. She wrapped her arms around him and pulled him tighter to her. Did I mention that I'm proud of you, Izuku? Well, I'm proud. Thank you, Mom, he said, squeezing her back. Will you put on your uniform for me? Izuku reeled at the rapid topic change. What? She pulled away from him, blinking tears out of her eyes. I won't be able to see you on your first day, so will you put it on for me today, so I can take a picture of you in it? Oh, for your photo album, Izuku realized. You take a picture of me on my first day every year, right? She nodded. Izuku bit his lip, considering. It wasn't a strange request, per se, there weren't any rules against wearing his school uniform outside of class, but it still felt wrong, somehow. But his mom had rented a car, drove him here, and helped him unpack, so it was also the very least he could do for her. He nodded. 6 All Might posters and 4 cleverly placed figurines later, and Izuku was stepping out of his tiny, attached bathroom wearing the deep navy blue briefs, white button-up, and blue coat of Shiketsu High. After struggling with it in the bathroom mirror for about 5 minutes, he ended up just holding the hat in his hands. He offered his mom a nervous smile. What do you think? She made a soft squealing noise and clapped both of her hands over her mouth. He could see that she was trying to hold back tears again. Oh, Izuku honey, she said. You look so mature. How about the hat? Oh, Izuku said, worrying at the edge of it. It actually doesn't fit over my hair. His mom snickered, but she was polite about it, covering her mouth with her hands. Let me see, she commanded. Izuku did his best to comply, he really did, tugging the hat over his mess of curls the best he could, but his hair was impossible to tame, and pushed the hat off his head regardless. He looked, frankly, ridiculous. His mom came over to him, gently pulling his hat off his head before running a hand through his curls, brushing them out with her fingers. How about a haircut, baby? She asked. A new look for you, come high school. He worried his lip between his teeth, but there wasn't really much consideration necessary to answer this question. He liked his hair, he really did, even with as unruly as it was, but he also wanted his uniform hat to fit and not look ridiculous, so he nodded. His mom pulled his desk chair into his bathroom, situating it in front of his mirror, and pushed him down into it. She grabbed one of his towels, spread it across his shoulders, and then fetched scissors and clippers from Izuku's toiletry bag and set to work. Izuku closed his eyes as she cut his hair, letting the soft sounds of the clippers buzzing, the scissors snipping, and his hair falling feather light to the floor lull him into a meditative state. All done, his mom said, and Izuku finally opened his eyes. She'd buzzed the sides of his hair completely off, and the back too, leaving only a shock of green at the top. She'd also trimmed that considerably. He ran a hand through it, surprised to find it pass through rather easily, compared to how it usually went. Curls sprang into their usual chaos again once his hand had passed, though, which made him smile at the familiarity of it all the same. It looks really good, Mom. Try the hat. He did, first carding a hand through what was left of his hair to smooth it down and then quickly placing his hat over it before his hair had the chance to spring back up. A few strands curled out from under the brim in the front, but other than that, the hat was a success. Oh, Izuku, his mom said, gathering up the green hair on his towel and shaking it out into his trash can. I love it. Are you happy? Yes, he said, without having to think about it. I am happy. And not just with the haircut. She took his picture after that, and he changed back into his casual clothes. His mom picked up some takeout and brought it back to his dorm room. Yurashi came over for this too, and ruffled Izuku's hair for a good minute when he saw the new cut, and they ate, and then he bid her a quiet goodbye outside of the entrance to the campus. He returned to his room alone, after that. He should have felt morose, or nervous, or unsure, but for some reason, all he felt was calm reassurance. He was in the right place. The first day of class was eventful. There were 2 classes of hero hopefuls at Shiketsu, each filled with 20 people. 15 out of 20 were the ones that were automatically admitted based off of the points system alone. The other 5 were chosen the next day, after faculty reviewed their work in the written portion and the practical. The 10 students that got in this way, 5 in each class, were selected carefully, for either demonstrating skill in battle or in strategy or in rescue, and the points they earned during the practical didn't necessarily matter. Izuku liked this system. He thought that it made a lot of sense, because not every pro hero had a quirk that was suited to combat. It gave people a chance, not just the quirks people happened to have. He was also happy to see that one of the girls that had been in his group for the exam had gotten in this way. He'd been worried about them, since he ended their exam after only 4.5 minutes. The people that had been stuck with him by random selection weren't given as many opportunities to get points as the others. Of course, though, Shiketsu had probably engineered that particular facet of the exam with that fact in mind. Pros always had to step on the toes of other pros, for both glory and money. If somebody else rescued the civilian before you, or got to the villain fight first, you don't get 10 more minutes to show how great you would be at finding the same civilian if only you'd gotten there faster. Still, it was a little unfair. As it worked out, Kinetic ended up being Izuku's homeroom teacher. He shot Izuku a bright smile and a thumbs up as he walked through the door to the room. Izuku, of course, blushed. He was a fanboy, through and through. And Kinetic's hero costume looked cool. Warm, since he had a flame quirk? It looked good. And then the first objective of the day was introduced. The support development team that Shiketsu employed exclusively for the costume design of their heroic students was coming in. There were 10 designers, and each designer would meet with 2 students, talk to them about their quirk and what design ideas they had in mind to start with, but there were rules. Unlike some hero courses in the country, like Ketsubutsu or UA, which let students design costumes at their own discretion, Shiketsu wanted to present a unified front. They weren't as extreme as some other schools, which quite literally just gave every student the same hero costume, with minor variations in support items as needed, but they were prideful. Every hero costume needed to look sharp when paired with the Shiketsu hat. Izuku was paired with the same girl from his group in the entrance exam, then with a designer. He was a short, no-nonsense man named Kenji Yo, and he went straight to business questioning the girl. Izuku made a note of her name and filed it away in his mind. Nakamura Hinako. "What's your quirk?" Kenji asked her. "I can shrink and grow my body at will. Think of a milady, except I can also get smaller as well as bigger, and not as big as her." "That's straightforward enough," Kenji said, scowling at his clipboard as he took notes at a pace that put even Izuku, the Lissar note-taker, to shame. "All right, shrink to your smallest form." Nakamura complied, and he measured her efficiently, producing a tape measure from the belt at his waist. He spent the next hour having her grow herself gradually, measuring her every changes, jotting notes furiously the whole way, while Izuku sat, neglected but intrigued, watching him work as he made Nakamura run laps and touch her toes, keeping up a steady stream of questions about her quirk and how it worked the whole while, never pausing in his note-taking. Izuku felt like he probably had a lot to learn from this strange support man, at least on the quirk analysis front. He was also glad that he decided to attack Nakamura first, since it gave Izuku a chance to collect his thoughts and prepare himself for all the questions he was about to be asked about his own quirk. Eventually, Kenji's line of questioning moved from the specifics of Nakamura's quirk and onto the specifics of what Nakamura wanted to do with her quirk: rescue, combat, stealth operations, publicity. The list of questions he asked went on and on. Nakamura looked more like she wanted to faint from exhaustion with each passing question, explaining that she saw herself as more of a stealth and combat sort of hero, since she could fit into tight and large spaces and pull off interesting mix-ups with her size variation abilities, though she admitted that she wasn't very experienced in that yet. Kenji's pencil ticked away the whole while. He asked her, then, what sort of ideas she had for a costume initially, and she blanched. "I always thought pink was a good color on me, so I wanted to go with that," she said. Kenji pursed his lips. "No," he said, and now he was pulling swaths of cloth out of his belt of wonders and holding them up to Nakamura. "Pink is not allowed, anyway, and besides, dear, it would wash you out way too much. Let's see. Oh, I think this one is a winner." Izuku leaned over to peer around Kenji's shoulder at the cloth he was holding up. He was holding up 2, actually, one a deep violet and the other a deep blue that perfectly matched the color of the Shiketsu high hat. Izuku was far from an expert on color theory, but he did think they were pretty enough. As far as colors went. "You came to the perfect school, dear," Kenji said, back to taking his notes. "Dark colors go just wonderful with dark hair, and it would be a shame to not play to the gray in your eyes." "A shame," Now, dear, you go have a seat with the green one while I take a minute to work a few things out for you. Nakamura breathed a sigh of relief and slumped over to where Izuku was. She'd seemed nice enough during the entrance exam, so he offered her a tentative smile. She smiled weakly in return, slouching into the seat next to him. I'm Nakamura, by the way, she said, dipping her head to him. Nakamura Hanako. I know who you are, she said, interrupting with a cutting smile. Everyone knows who you are, Midoriya-kun. Right? He said, rubbing the back of his neck and trying to disguise the blush creeping up his cheeks. The announcement. At the entrance exam. Nakamura agreed. I was in your group, you know. Not that I'd expect you to remember me. But then again, of course she'd think he would think he's too good to remember other people. He'd gotten the top score after all. The guys that usually got top scores on things didn't remember the people in their testing zones. He doubted Kaken did, anyway. I remember you. I mean, I didn't know your name until today, but I'm pretty good with faces. I remember you being there. She raised her eyebrows, her own cheeks a little red now too. By the way, I'm gonna just say it now before I lose the confidence, but the thigh thing sounds pretty impressive. Izuku squeaked, reaching for the brim of his hat and tugging it as far down his face as it would allow. Please don't talk about that, Nakamura-san. Please. I'll agree to that if you agree to be my friend, she said. Izuku blinked. Listen, blunt works best for me, so I'm just going to say it outright. I'd like to have the most powerful guy in the grade backing me, so is that cool with you? Izuku said, as eloquent as ever. Yep, that's cool with me. Friends it is. Sweet, Nakamura said, flashing him another sharp grin. Izuku tried not to think too much about how she just decided she wanted to be friends with him on the basis of his quirk alone. He tried not to think about it. Really he did. He didn't succeed. You seem pretty nice, actually, Nakamura said, leaning back in her seat and offering him a smile that looked a lot less sharp than her last. He started. Oh yeah? Like that? The stuttering. I never would expect the person that got the top score in the exam to be so humble, but here you are. I wouldn't call it humble, actually, he mumbled, doing his best to both look away and also not blush. Dimmin his overly expressive face. What's a better word than humble, then? She asked. He sighed. Nervous wreck is a contender, I think. She laughed. You're actually pretty funny, too. Look out. Incoming. Kenji arrived in front of them, promptly shoving a design under Nakamura's nose. Take a look at that, dear, he said. If you have suggestions, you can say them, but I most likely won't listen. Sign on the dotted line when you're ready to confirm it. Now for you. He turned to Izuku, eyes sparkling. It was a dangerous sort of sparkle, Izuku decided. Izuku started, not sure where he was going with it. Quirk. Kenji shouted, pulling a new clipboard out of his belt too and poising to write, pencil at the ready. Izuku had spent his whole life passionately questioning other people about their quirks, if they would let him, and it was really weird being on the receiving end for once. Izuku launched into his explanation, the same one that he'd given Yurashi and the principal at Aldra. Kenji questioned him further, probing for all the nitty-gritty details of Izuku's quirk, which he gave excluding the one about how he'd inherited it from the number 1 hero, and everything along those lines. He measured Izuku twice, once while he was flexing and once while he was relaxing. He had Izuku run laps, activate his quirk, do push-ups and sit-ups and pull-ups. He had him climb up the rope in the gym, had him jump as high as possible, had him stretch. When he checked Izuku's flexibility and discovered that he could nearly get one foot behind his head while standing on the other one, he couldn't help but tut at him, unreasonably impressed. I'd invest in these legs if I were you, darling, Kenji said, not even looking up from his notes. What? Izuku said, caught off guard with his leg over his head. He nearly fell over because of it. I mean you should fight with them is all, Kenji said, looking up from his notes to assess Izuku now. Legs are stronger than arms, anyway, and you're surprisingly flexible. Trust me, he knows, Nakamura piped in from the sidelines. He strangled someone with his thighs in the practical exam. I did not strangle him. Sounded like you strangled him to me. Nakamura shrugged infuriatingly. This is delightful information indeed. Kenji said, Darling, I must see this thigh strangle. You, dear, will you let him demonstrate on you? He pointed the end of his pencil at Nakamura. She grinned wickedly. I would love to. And so it was that Nakamura ended up standing in front of one of the pull-up bars, Izuku behind it. He looked up at the bar, sighed, and looked back at Nakamura. I'm not going to actually strangle you, I promise, he whispered. She looked entirely unconcerned with the prospect of being strangled by Thaijutsu, which was worrying. Izuku gave her a dubious look as she nodded. Whenever you're ready, darling, Kenji said, tapping his pencil against his clipboard impatiently. There wasn't anything Izuku wanted to do less than leap up onto the pull-up bar and crush his new friend between his thighs, but here he was, doing it anyway. He did it in one fluid motion, catching the bar with his hands and then immediately swinging his legs up and over Nakamura's shoulders, wrapping them around her neck swiftly, and squeezed lightly. Kenji, for his part, looked absolutely delighted by the predicament. He scribbled away furiously, and then after a moment, signaled to Izuku that he could let Nakamura go, which he did, not without enormous gratitude. All right, darling, here's the assessment, Kenji said, flicking his pencil at Izuku quickly before continuing to write. You're flexible, surprisingly strong, and incredibly fast. You're not limited to just combat or just rescue or just publicity or just stealth, like a lot of other heroes might be. So, you're probably planning to dabble in all of these categories and more. You'll need a suit that's as flexible and sturdy as you are, but sharp and stylish as well, yes? Is there anything else you want from me, darling? Izuku clenched and unclenched his hand, studying how the muscles there moved for a moment. Using my quirk for extended PRDS of time can really strain my limbs. If you could incorporate something into the design that helps to stabilize my arms and legs, I would appreciate that. I also think I'm probably going to spend a lot of time jumping, so I kind of want to incorporate some sort of visor too, if I can. I've heard that bugs in the eyes can be a problem with that sort of thing. He'd heard that from All Might himself, actually. It was one of the few things that Yagi had advised him to include in his costume design, the only time they talked about it. All very reasonable requests, he said, nodding and pursing his lips. With no further ado, he set to a flurry of pencil movements, frantically scribbling away at his design ideas. Nakamura and Izuku were effectively left to their own devices for the moment. Nakamura bumped his shoulder with hers and gestured to the bench they'd been sitting on earlier, so they returned to it. Izuku fished his water bottle out of his bag and drank greedily. Nakamura rooted around for a moment, found the clipboard with her costume design on it, and showed it to Izuku while he drank. I think that'll be cool, he commented because he did. Nakamura lifted one shoulder in a sort of half-shrug. I'm a little worried about the skin-tight bodysuit thing, but the way he patterned the two colors looks like it'll be flattering. He's very thorough, he even gave me underwear suggestions. And then she showed Izuku said underwear suggestions on the next page, and he felt like he'd probably never been this red before in his life. Shortly after that, Kenji wandered over and moved a design under Izuku's nose, too, and Izuku couldn't help but stare. He designed hero costumes for himself several times when he was a kid, back when he was quirkless and hadn't met All Might yet. All of those had been rip-offs of All Might's costumes, more or less, usually with a hood that gave him the classic V-shape of All Might's hair, or that plastered his smile over his own. This costume was not like that. The first layer was an all-black bodysuit, doubling as both armor and compression gear meant to stabilize his arms and his legs. Kenji also recommended briefs, not boxers, and a GNTL guard that, honestly, seemed like a really good call that Izuku wouldn't have thought of on his own. Over that was a dark green jumpsuit with no sleeves, but instead of resembling anything remotely symmetrical, it zipped on the left side of his chest, creating a sharp silhouette with a high, asymmetrical collar, punctuated with stark black lines running the length of the suit. He'd been given sturdy, fingerless black gloves, ideal for both stealth and durability. His legs were braced as well, and also padded with armor. The whole thing was brought together with a red belt and red, reinforced combat boots, and a pair red-tinted and black-banded goggles that rested on the forehead of the Izuku in the drawing. I was inspired by the red shoes, Kenji said, pointing at Izuku's feet. Izuku raised them to look at them, then back at the drawing. Sure enough, the shoes in the costume appeared to just be his shoes, but with armor added. Huh, he said. I like the red, I think. It reminded him of All Might, actually, in a way that was much more subtle than Izuku would have come up with on his own. I don't love how tight you made it though. That will certainly not be changing, darling. You are flexible, yes? Tight is better with flexible than loose is. Oh, Izuku said, a little dejected. He had no other complaints, so he signed the form. Beside him, Nakamura did the same. Kenji collected his designs from the both of them, gave them a bow, and left. Only one other designer was left in the room, and as soon as she left, Kinetic cleared his throat and called the class together. The rest of the day today will be spent pushing your quirks to their limits, Kinetic said. If you were expecting this to be fun or easy, think again. Today, we're going to put your bodies and your quirks through hell. I picked out your class representative, Kinetic announced brightly the next day as he strolled into homeroom. Izuku's classmates, who had been sitting mostly quietly at their desks before that, erupted into noise. Izuku smiled but did not join in, just drummed the pads of his fingers against his desk, his mind already working. Class representative, though usually a somewhat boring responsibility, held a lot more importance in a heroics course. It was a powerful thing to have on your resume. It proved that you already had experience leading teams and that you weren't afraid of taking on additional responsibilities. Both good things for an aspiring hero. As such, class representatives in hero courses were usually chosen based on a mix of their grades, their people skills, and their relative skill in combat. Izuku silently drummed his fingers on the underside of the desk to keep himself from muttering. Well, Izuku probably wouldn't be chosen. He was pretty good with grades, now that he didn't get punished for getting high scores, but he lacked in people skills and was still new to combat. He was okay with that though. The whole purpose of coming to Shiketsu was to avoid the spotlight, after all. Kinetic-sensei, who is it? Nakamura asked, shooting up in her seat with her hand up as she did. She accidentally grew a little bit in her excitement. Izuku also smiled at that, though he hid it by ducking under the brim of his hat. Peace, peace, Kinetic said, laughing as he held out both hands in a placating gesture. He rolled his desk chair over, then practically fell in it, backwards, as per usual. He rested his elbows on the back of his chair. The rest of the class quieted down somewhat, and Izuku ceased his finger drumming. They all turned rapt gazes on Kinetic as he began to explain. I took care to monitor you all while you worked on your quirks in training yesterday, as well as during your meetings with your costume designers, Kinetic explained, his grin sharp. I was keeping an eye out for students that were good at interacting with their peers, but I was also keeping an eye out for students with exceptional control of their abilities. Ah, so Izuku was definitely out of the running then. He'd had his quirk for less than 2 months. He hardly had exceptional control over anything. That's why none of you should be surprised that Midoriya Izuku is your class representative. Izuku's heart fluttered in his chest. He gripped the edge of his desk tightly and stared, first at the rest of the class, who were nodding along like it made sense for some reason, and then at Kinetic. What? His voice was entering squeak levels. He brought it down a little. Me? Nobody should be surprised other than Midoriya-san himself, I mean, Kinetic said, which earned him a few laughs from the class. Why me? Izuku asked, feeling lightheaded. Kinetic rolled his eyes. He honest-to-goodness rolled his eyes, like Izuku just asked him the stupidest question he'd ever heard. Don't be so surprised, kid. You're faster, stronger, and more flexible than nearly all of your peers. You have near-perfect control of your quirk. What? And your classmates have clear respect for you. What? Izuku looked around. The rest of the people in his class, he didn't even know all their names yet, and he was supposed to lead them, oh gods, looked back at him, some of them looking a little amused. Nakamura flashed him a bright grin. Ah, Izuku said as he tried to restart his brain. Forget resume appeal, he had to get out of this before his social anxiety killed him. I'm terrible at presenting in front of the class, though, he blurted. The class, including Kinetic, laughed. Midoriya-san, don't worry so much. You're going to do great. Kinetic said, rolling himself back towards the blackboard. Besides, I won't let you step down anyway. It'll be good for you. There had to be something Izuku could say to convince him. There had to be something, anything. He couldn't lead his class, or stand in the spotlight, or... Izuku realized it all at once. It was one thing to not be offered the position at all, but to be offered it and turn it down anyway. That looked bad. It would look like he wasn't interested in accepting responsibility, or like he couldn't. Izuku drummed his fingers on the underside of his desk as Kinetic began teaching them some basics of hero law. He would have to embrace it, then. And be good at it too. He peeked around at his classmates as Kinetic carried on with the lecture. Izuku could do this. Probably. Most likely. Izuku was still very apprehensive about his nomination election. Forced participation? As class rep as he checked and double-checked the name on the little placard outside of the office door. Kinetic had gone over his new responsibilities with him outside of class, but he didn't really think it was enough to be fully prepared. Hence why he had come here. He took a deep breath, trying to steel himself, and knocked politely on the door. There wasn't an immediate reply, and for about 10 seconds Izuku thought he had lucked out and Iwabumi wasn't in her office right now. Then the door opened, and Iwabumi stood in front of him, in full hero costume, peering at him curiously. The 3 snakes in her hair peered at him curiously too. He wanted to ask her about them so bad. Were they real snakes? Did she have to feed them? Did they have her own conscious thoughts, or were they more like puppets she controlled? If they did have their own conscious, then did that mean she could communicate to all snakes, or just the 3 in her hair? She didn't do any combat now, but did she ever have to when she was in a hero course, herself? How did she do it? Did she set her snakes on people? He asked none of these questions. He also didn't gush about how incredible her rescues were, and how many lives she had saved, and how great it was that a portion of all her star profits went towards women's shelters. He took a deep breath, ready to unleash an explanation for why he was there, but Iwabumi beat him to the punch. You haven't even had a class with me yet, Midoriya-san, she said, her tone almost teasing. Oh, Izuku said, his mind blanking. The only thought getting through his processor was Iwabumi knows who I am, echoing over and over and over again. Iwabumi gave him a bemused look, apparently content to sit by and let his brain short-circuit. How? Izuku finally whisper-asked about a full minute later. How do I know who you are? He was so glad she understood that. He nodded. Iwabumi trilled a laugh. Everyone knows who you are, Midoriya-san. You made quite the splash at the entrance exam, you know. Izuku said, because compliments were hard enough to deal with, even when they weren't coming from a pro. A very patient pro, since Iwabumi was still just giving him a long, amused look, her golden eyes glittering with mirth. Well, what can I do for you? She finally asked, apparently either taking pity on him or running out of time to stand there while he struggled through his thoughts. He was grateful for the question though, because it effectively snapped him out of it. He had a purpose for all this torture he just put himself through. Actually, he said, rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly, I got chosen to be Class R representative, and I'm pretty awful at, talking to people. So I was wondering, you're the peer teacher, and Izuku swallowed the lump in his throat that was forming, trying to tell him that he couldn't ask for help from a teacher. Teachers were all the same, that lump said. They never helped him. It doesn't matter, Izuku told himself sternly. If Iwabumi-sensei won't help, then I'll just do what I've always done. Figure it out myself. I was hoping you could help me. Iwabumi smiled. Well, it is a little unconventional, but it would certainly ease the boredom of the first week office hours. Nobody has any reason to come in yet. Except for you, apparently. She didn't sound upset or unkind about it, though. Izuku was pretty good at distinguishing those tones of voice from other ones, after years of hearing them from every teacher that spoke to him. And every person, pretty much. He stepped inside. Iwabumi's office, unlike Iwabumi herself, was relatively simple. There was a photo framed on the wall, a picture of her and a man with snake hair like hers, though his was much shorter and also down. There were a few other simple directions, like crayon drawings of Iwabami that were most likely from kids, and a few generic but nice-looking snake-themed art pieces. Iwabami noticed his gaze. "That's my baby brother," she said, gesturing to the picture framed on the wall. "He's on his way to becoming a doctor now. Everything else was sent to me by my fans. I can't keep it in the office at my agency, so I like to keep it all here instead. I think it can be inspiring for students to see it." Izuku nodded, feeling a smile gracing his face. It was inspiring in a way. Heroes existed to make a positive impact on the world, and all these crayon drawings and bad canvas prints were proof of that. Proof that they mattered. "I like them," he said simply. Iwabami nodded, sitting behind her desk. Izuku took a seat on one of the chairs placed in front of it, already channeling some of his nervous energy into the silent drumbeat. He tapped out on his thigh with his fingers. Iwabami noticed, but she didn't tell him to stop. "So, Midoriya-sen, I'm guessing you have a problem with nerves." Izuku stopped drumming almost immediately, as a reflex. "Yeah," he said. "Thanks for agreeing to help me, Iwabami-sensei." "Don't mention it," she said, waving his thanks off. One of the snakes in her hair waved it off too. "I'm only doing my job." Oh, Izuku said, and he started drumming again, just to keep himself from saying anything stupid like "I'm not used to teachers that actually want to do their job and teach," is all. Iwabami smiled encouragingly and said, "Usually in one of my first lectures, I talk about the importance of cultivating a hero persona. These personas shouldn't be all too different from your natural personality, but heroes spend a good portion of their time in front of a camera or reassuring people that have been seriously hurt. Of course, this means that certain nuances of anyone's personality or feelings usually need to be swept under the rug." Izuku nodded, knowing what she was getting at. He couldn't go around stammering his way through sentences when he was trying to help someone injured out of a pile of rubble or when a camera was shoved in his face after a fight. Besides, knowing Yagi meant that Izuku knew well and good what it meant to have a hero persona. All Might was kind, strong, reassuring, and witty. Yagi was all of those things too, but he presented them in a much different way, calm and wry versus All Might's boisterous enthusiasm. "If you'd like," Iwabami continued, "I can help you start crafting this persona today. It might help you with your concerns with class representative." It wasn't a bad idea. It would be a lot less nerve-wracking to be able to stand in front of his class as someone other than Midoriya Izuku, who was a nervous mess that had never had a real conversation with someone his age up until a few months ago, and it showed. And it would be good practice for when he did go pro, anyway. "Thank you, Iwabami-sensei," he said, nodding as he did. "I think that would be helpful." "Alright, let's get to work then. First, tell me about yourself." "Like what?" "Interests, hobbies, skills. Anything you want. Though, start with what kind of hero you want to be right now." "Oh," Izuku said, pausing to collect his thoughts. I want to be the sort of hero that saves people. Not just on an individual basis, but on a wider basis too. Like you with the women's shelters, Iwabami-sensei." Iwabami folded her hands under her chin, smiling languidly at him. "Most people don't know that I donate a portion of all my profits to women's shelters." Izuku felt a flush rising on his cheeks. "It's on all your merchandise." She raised a delicate eyebrow. "At the bottom. In fine print." "Right. That's a hobby of mine. I love heroes." "All heroes." "Very well," she said, though she sounded pleased. "Who's your favorite?" "Don't worry, I won't be offended if it's not me." Izuku laughed nervously, resisting the urge to draw his knees to his chest. "It's, All Might actually." "Do you want to be a hero like All Might?" Izuku stopped himself. That had been such an easy question to answer a few months ago. "I used to want to be exactly like All Might," he said instead. "I used to practice impersonations of him in the mirror every morning and everything. He's strong, funny, and kind. He never fails to save someone, no matter what." "You both have strength enhancement quirks of some kind, too," Iwabami mused. Izuku paled, and fought down the waves of panic threatening to crush him at that moment. "Alright," he said. "He's a huge inspiration for me. I don't want to be a hero just like him, though." Iwabami frowned, slightly, as one of her snakes flicked out its tongue. "You're afraid," she observed. Izuku cursed himself. How had he forgotten that her snakes could pick up on emotions? Coming here was a terrible idea. Talking to Iwabami one-on-one was a terrible idea for him, in general. He couldn't very well just stand up and leave, though, so, think, Izuku. "I don't like comparisons like that," Izuku said, drumming his fingers harder as he thought his way through these words. "They scare me because they make me feel trapped on a specific path. All Might he's amazing. Maybe one day I'll be like him, but I want to spend today just helping people. There's a lot of people that don't have heroes to watch out for them on a day-to-day business, and I want to help them." Iwabami's smile returned, just as genuine as it had been before. Izuku breathed an inward sigh of relief. "That's very noble of you, Midoriya-san," she said. "It makes sense too. You have a base agility level comparable to the average underground hero." Underground? Izuku spluttered. I couldn't. Iwabami-sensei, underground heroes are insanely skilled. They're like modern shinobi. Iwabami laughed, covering her mouth with one hand as she did. "Oh, most people don't even know what an underground hero is, you know." "How could they not?" Izuku said, all nervousness forgotten in favor of fanboying instead. As per the usual with Izuku, underground heroes are practically the foundation of all heroics. They work long, unforgiving hours. They do nearly all the intel gathering that makes larger operations possible for Limelight heroes. They have some of the most clever quirk applications I've ever seen. I'm used to students being worried they don't have what it takes to be in the top 50 of the Billboard charts one day, not students being worried they don't have what it takes to be nearly invisible to the spotlight entirely. Iwabami mused faintly. All of Izuku's thoughts came to a screeching halt. It was true, he realized. As convinced as he usually was that he wasn't enough, he didn't doubt that he could break through the top 50 of the billboards one day. It was a foregone conclusion in his mind. He had All Might's quirk, after all, and anyone that had All Might's quirk was automatically going to be strong, even if it was him. That's what it was, wasn't it? He wasn't worried that he'd never make it as a hero, not anymore. He was worried that he'd never make it as a hero on his own strength. "Well," he said instead, around the lump in his mouth that was his tongue. "Underground heroes have higher case resolution rates than their Limelight counterparts, but they also have much higher death rates. It's not the sort of career in heroics that most heroes in training would be comfortable with entering." Iwabami hummed. "I suppose that's true. Do you have any other interests besides heroes?" Izuku stared at his hands. "Underground heroics, huh? There was no way he could do it, right? Midoriya-san." "Sorry," Izuku said, jolting himself out of his thoughts at the sound of his name. He looked up to find Iwabami's gaze on him. She looked concerned. Under her desk, Izuku closed his hand into a fist. "I'm sorry, I was lost in thought." "What did you say?" Iwabami still looked a little wary, but not like she was about to give Izuku a detention for zoning out. He'd gotten those a lot through the years. "That's all right, Midoriya-san. I was just asking you about any other interests you have outside of heroes." "Oh," Izuku said, shaking off the remnants of his thoughts. "I don't have many other interests, besides academics and athletic stuff." "What sort of athletic stuff?" "I got into weightlifting to get into shiketsu," Izuku said, lips twitching at the memory of hauling All Might on top of a fridge across a beach. "Weightlifting indeed. And running. And dancing." "Dancing?" Iwabami echoed. Izuku nodded. "It's good for working on full-body coordination and movement fluidity." Iwabami hummed in agreement. "That's a very helpful hobby for hero work." Izuku spared a small smile. "I thought so too. I'm still kind of bad at it, though." Iwabami laughed. "That's all right, Midoriya-san. I'm impressed that you do it at all. I'll give you some pointers, sometime, if you'd like." Izuku tried not to have a slide at the words. Iwabami, offering to give him dance lessons? "Not possible. You dance?" "I do," she said, resting her chin on her hands again. One of her snakes flicked out its tongue. "I have some ideas for this hero persona of yours as well." "Oh." Izuku said, straightening in his seat a bit. What are they? Those smiles you give are very charming, Iwabami said. I would lean on them if I were you. Beyond that, your blushes are fairly adorable, and you have a smooth, gentle sort of voice. I think, if you focused on these, you could sell yourself as humble and reassuring. Of course, you just have to focus on not stuttering and keeping that panicked tone out of your voice. Composure is key, after all. Also, she turned away to fish something out of her desk, then handed it over to him. Feel free to try this out. It'll give you something to do with your hands when you're nervous. Izuku turned it over. It was a cube with little knobs and dials all over it. He twisted one experimentally. What's this? That is a fidget cube. I keep them in my office. I used to get nervous in front of the media too, believe it or not. Izuku immediately tried to hand it back. I can't take this, Iwabami-sensei. It's yours, you should keep it if. Don't worry, she said, fishing 3 more out of the desk and showing them to him. They break fairly often, so I keep several backups on hand. I like to give them to people that need them, too. Fielding the attention that you get as a hero can be rather difficult, and I would like to see as many students succeed at it as possible. Thank you, Izuku whispered, looking at the strange object in his hand with a newfound reverence. A gift from a pro. He could probably sell this on the internet for 10,000 yen. He wouldn't, of course, but he could. If he wanted to. I'm happy to help, Iwabami said, smiling as she waved him out the door. Hey, Class Republic. Izuku paused, stealing his nerves. Hey, he responded, and the boy he'd just approached eyed him. He wasn't exactly wary, but he was definitely curious. What's up? He eventually asked. I'm going around asking everyone their names and quirks, Izuku said. And anything else you want to tell me too. If I'm going to lead a class, I should know them, right? He tried for one of those smiles that Iwabami had told him to go for. The smile apparently worked, because the student in question grinned back at him. Oh yeah, totally. You're really devoted to this whole thing, aren't you? You mean being class rep? Nah, I mean the whole hero thing, he said instead, shaking his head slightly. You've just got that look in your eye that says you're going places or whatever. You know what I mean. I think everyone in here is going places, Izuku said, inclining his head respectfully in his classmates' direction. They wouldn't have gotten into Shiketsu otherwise. His grin broadened. Yeah, I agree. Oh, I'm Arkawaturu, by the way. My quirk is poison ivy. Do you make poison ivy? Izuku asked. It would be cool if he did, not to mention relatively useful for hero work. He could use it to bind people, but it would also give them rashes if he wasn't careful. Oh no. I named it after this villain from some pre-quirk comics, he said. Izuku allowed his lips to twitch in amusement. A hero hopeful, who had named his quirk after one of the most iconic villains in DC Comics history. You control plants in general, he guessed, since that was more or less what Poison Ivy's quirk was. Or superpower. Nuances. I do. Arakawa agreed. I can also secrete pheromones like a plant, though they have an effect on the human psyche. So, I could make people feel afraid or horny or whatever if they got in the cloud. If that's the case, then you could be sort of like Midnight, Izuku observed. Fighting style-wise, I mean. My hero, Arakawa said, clutching one hand over his heart dramatically. In all seriousness though, dude, I totally look up to Midnight. When I was a kid, I wanted to be one of her sidekicks. You know, one of the young hot dudes in a suit that follows her around? It would be an actual dream. Izuku blinked. Different strokes, different folks, he supposed. He could respect that, even if it was a little interesting. He had certainly never dreamed of being someone's sidekick. Well, I'm sure you can make it happen, Arfun. Thanks, dude. Of course, Izuku said, sliding past his seat to talk to the student behind him. He committed everything he'd just learned to memory as he did. Arakawaturu. Quirk, Poison Ivy. In the hero course because he wants to be a young hot dude in a suit following pro-hero Midnight around. He arrived at the next desk, opening his mouth to start his introduction, but the girl there caught his eye with a shy smile. I heard, she said, tucking a strand of long purple hair behind her ear as she did. Her eyes were a brilliant red, like Kaken's, but a lot softer. My name is Watanabe Mura. My quirk is called ultraviolet. I can control the intensity of light waves. That sounds like an amazing quirk, Izuku said, unable to help a little bit of his excitement. Can you control the intensity of all light on the electromagnetic spectrum, or just violet light? Do you have to manipulate the light in a room itself, or do you generate light? Does that mean you would be at a disadvantage in a dark room? She giggled, interrupting his stream of questions. Yes, to the first question. Everything from infrared to ultraviolet is at my disposal. To the second question, your first guess was correct. I manipulate existing light, instead of generating light where before there was none. That means that, yes, I am at a disadvantage in a dark room, though I am not completely useless. We don't usually think about it this way because we think about light in terms of what is seen rather than what is not, but some quantity of light exists even in the dark. That's really amazing, Izuku breathed, leaning his hip against her desk. Do you fight by increasing the intensity of light waves and directing them towards your opponent? Or do you think you would rely more on maybe blinding them? But then would that style of fighting be less useful against an opponent that is either already blind or has a hearing enhancement quirk? You ask a lot of these questions, Watanabe said, steepling her fingers in front of her. Are you interested in quirk analysis as well as acrobatics? Izuku felt a blush creeping up his face. He'd somehow managed to forget how weird and creepy his interest in quirks was. Oh, yes. Fascinating, Watanabe said, averting her gaze as pink began to dust her cheeks. I am very interested in quirk analysis as well. I actually wanted to ask you about yours, but I figured you would not be receptive to the questions. Izuku was immediately and completely taken aback. Another person interested in quirks? Unheard of. Also, why would she think he wouldn't be okay with her asking him about his quirk? Probably the same reason you thought she wouldn't be okay with you asking about hers, dipshit, a very helpful voice in the back of his head supplied. That made sense. You can ask, Izuku said, offering her an encouraging smile. I don't mind. I'll answer any question I can. Really? She asked, looking at him with eyes blown wide. You don't worry about divulging information like that to the competition? She made a good point, he supposed. Knowing the ins and outs of other people's quirks would certainly help with strategies in the long run and give her a hand up in future combat practice, but also, everyone in this class is an ally first and foremost, he said, shrugging as he did. We're all going to be pros together one day, and when that day comes, it's much better to know what each other's quirks are and what our limits are. So I don't mind answering, even if it means that I might end up giving you information you can use to beat me in a match later on. She blinked owlishly at him. You are positive? Like a whole number. She stared at him for a long moment, until Arakawa, who had been politely eavesdropping from the seat in front of them, burst out laughing. Oh my god, nerd humor, he said. Izuku cracked a smile, and finally a little giggle trilled out of Watanabe. All right, she conceded, though she still looked a little nervous, cutting her eyes to Izuku and away again. Well, first, I was wondering about the mechanics of your quirk. It seems to be a strength and speed enhancer, but I also noticed that you emit some sort of light around you that appears to be lightning. Additionally, when I stood too close to you once while you had your quirk activated, I noticed a considerable drop in the air pressure. So, is your quirk a physical enhancer, or some sort of weather emitter? Izuku nodded along through her lead-up, then paused on the question. He noticed that several of the students all around him were gazing expectantly at him. Apparently, the details on his quirk were a hot topic. Not that he could blame them, really. If Izuku had been anyone else and he'd seen someone walk in with a quirk like his, he'd probably jump on a chance to ask them 1,000 questions about it too. My quirk is called Inner Storm, he explained, projecting his voice slightly for the benefit of the people that were a few seats away but still trying to listen in. It works by converting my emotions, or energy, into manifestations of strength. So, to answer your question, it's actually both a physical enhancement and a weather emitter, though other than the air pressure, the weather emission that occurs, the lightning, is largely cosmetic. I've been told it tingles a bit, though, if you get caught in the crossfire of it. Oh, another one of the students nearby said, leaning an elbow on his desk. That's interesting because I thought for sure that with a quirk like that, you'd be the type to just go around punching things into oblivion. Except, when you told us about the villain at the entrance exam, it sounded like you're more of a stealthy, acrobatic type. A specific type of quirk doesn't necessarily always guarantee you a specific type of fighting style, Izuku said, shrugging. Quirk prejudice, apparently, reached everywhere. It's the way you apply the quirk you've been given that molds the hero you become, not the other way around. The whole class was looking at him, now, seemingly lost in thought. Izuku didn't want to disturb them, so he just stayed silent, shifting awkwardly under their gazes. He took a deep breath and looked up towards the ceiling, sliding his hands into his pockets so that he could roll his thumb over the fidget cube Iwabumi had given him, out of sight from the others. Well, Nakamura said, and Izuku looked over at her. He was a little worried that he'd already come to fear that look on her face after only knowing her for a day. Look at him. All I'm saying is, if you have thighs like that, it would be a shame not to use them to crush the enemy. And then, collectively, they glanced down, not so subtly, to his thighs, appraising them. A few nodded, like they found his thighs met whatever criteria they'd been judging them with. Somewhere along the way, Izuku had turned bright red. Certain death by social anxiety. Midoriya Izuku, 0. The door opened, and Kinetic wheeled himself in on his desk chair, kicking his legs out and shooting himself backwards to the blackboard like a kid that was having too much fun with the simple things in life. All right, he announced. Seats please. We have an exciting pop quiz on the nuances of collateral damage today. The class groaned collectively.